Good evening and welcome. This is the May 10th, 2023 public hearing of the Land Use Commission. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including planned developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or send a recommendation to City Council. Ms. Ashbaugh, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo is absent. Commissioner Halleck.
Here.
Commissioner Hugo.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson is absent. Commissioner Lindwall.
Here.
Commissioner Miranchev.
Here.
Commissioner Pucktell.
Here.
Commissioner Westerberg.
Here.
And Chair Rogers.
Here. With 7 members present, we do have a quorum. Also present tonight from city staff are Planner Katie Ashbaugh, Deputy City Attorney Alex Ruggie, Planner Michael Griffith. Couldn't remember what your title was. Look at your name tag. You don't come very often. And our Planning Manager Liz Williams. This is a formal hearing and there are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time so that all testimony may be accurately recorded. Anyone who wishes to address the commission regarding any matter on tonight's agenda will be able to do so at the appropriate time. Our procedure is to hear from the staff on file, the documents on file, and then receive testimony and other evidence from the applicant or appellant. After that, persons wishing to make a statement regarding the matter will have a chance to do so. Any person with a legal interest in property located within defined notification requirements of the subject property may present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. When all supporting and opposing testimony and statements have been heard, the applicant or appellant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal or a closing statement. Then the commission will close the record and begin deliberations to consider the standards. The commission will make formal findings of fact based on the testimony and evidence presented, guided by the standards, the commissioner's knowledge of the community, and the recommendations of staff. All testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance and the corresponding staff memorandum. When testifying, state your name and address for the record, and if you haven't already, please sign in on the public comment sheet, or sign-in sheet. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you're at a microphone when asking questions or making statements so that you can be properly recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. Any matter not concluded at tonight's hearing will be continued to our next regularly scheduled meeting. We do have one item on the agenda this evening, which is a plan development, which is 22 PLND 0012 for 3434 Central Street. Is the applicant here? Thank you. And we will get to that in just a moment. Before we do, though, we do have a couple other things on our agenda, which are the approval of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes that we will be approving. The first one is the April 19th, 2023. This was in regard to the District 65 school, for those of you who are looking for a way to differentiate the two. Has everyone had a chance to review those, and are there any edits? Hearing none, is there a motion for approval of the April 19th minutes?
I'll move to approve April 19th minutes.
Moved by Westerberg. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Pucktell. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the April 19th, 2023 minutes, please say aye.
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 And I need to abstain because I did not attend.
All right. Is anyone opposed? And then 1 abstention. So we have a 6-0-1 vote, and the motion.
I abstain as well.
Oh, you abstained. I'm sorry. Okay. So we have a 5-2 vote, or 5-0-2 vote, 2 abstentions. But the motion still carries, and those minutes are approved. With that, we'll move to the second set of minutes, which were for April 26th. These were for the Margarita Inn. Just again, kind of as a quick little reference. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Westerberg.
Just a correction on, starting on page 4 of the minutes. They reference the CEO of Connections for the Homeless. They have her listed as Betty Buck. I think that's Bogg, so that might just have to be corrected.
And I think that's throughout. There's a couple places I noticed that, so I just think that needs to be corrected in those places. Anything else? Hearing nothing else, is there a motion to approve?
I just want to mention that I wasn't at that meeting, but I did watch the video,
Okay,
so I'm going to vote.
all right. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Commissioner Westerberg moves approval. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Commissioner Puctal. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And anybody who has to abstain?
I'll abstain.
So we have one abstention, so that's a 6-0 vote, or 6-0-1 vote, and the motion carries, and those are approved now with that change that was discussed on properly identifying Ms. Bogg. With that now, we will move into the new business we have on our agenda this evening, which is the plan development for 3434 Central Street. At this point, I'm going to ask anybody who feels that they may be speaking to us on this matter to please be sworn by raising their right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings? Thank you. And why have I lost a piece of paper? Where's my sign-in sheets? Did everyone who wanted to speak to us tonight have an opportunity to sign in? And if not, I'll give you a couple minutes to come up and do that right now. These were on the back table.
They have been added.
Online, you already are on here. So it's anybody who came in after I stole them from the back table right before 7. And while that is happening, what is it I'm supposed to say now, according to our new rules? I open public testimony, or public comment, or what is the?
You can just say you open the public hearing.
Okay, good stuff. At this time, the chair will open the public hearing so that we can take testimony from the applicant and from the neighbors.
It's okay. Thank you.
Chair Rogers, can I just interject before we
Sure.
start there? Can we just get a quick clarification? Page 1 of the packet mentions that we're the recommending body. Page 3 of the packet says that we're the determining body. Can we just get a final clarification on that?
We are the recommending body on this because it is a plan development.
So we'll strike that.
Yeah.
We'll note that part in the packet.
Where are you seeing where it says,
Page 3 of the PDF.
okay, I was looking at the minutes, so the minutes are correct, and this is correct where we are. Yeah. Yes, we are a recommending body in this particular point. Thanks. So with that, I will ask the applicant if he would like to come up to the lectern, please.
Hello, everyone. Once again, I'm
I'm
Charles-
sorry, before
Oh,
we begin, let me have it read into the record. I'm a little out of it tonight.
Again, the subject property is 3434 Central Street, case number 22 PLND-0012. Charles Marlis, applicant, applies for a special use for a planned development and a special use to demolish the existing church and other site improvements in order to construct a new 2-story, 19,952 square foot building for a daycare center child, Kensington School, in the R2 Single Family Residential District. The applicant seeks site development allowances for impervious surface coverage of 60.5% where 55% is permitted. Detached accessory use, a refuse enclosure located within the south interior side yard where a detached accessory use is not permitted. Off-street parking located within the southeast front yard where parking is not permitted. Off-street parking located within the south interior side yard where parking is not permitted. To reduce the two-way drive aisle width from 24 feet to 17 feet. To reduce the required transition landscape strip along the west property line from 10 feet to 6 feet. And to eliminate the required 10-foot wide landscape strip along the south interior side property line. The applicant may seek, and the Land Use Commission may consider additional site development allowances as may be necessary or desirable for the proposed development. The Land Use Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, the determining body for this case.
Thank you. And just for the record, I'd like to state for everyone, this is not the first time this proposal has come before us. It has been tweaked since it came before us. But much of the testimony that has been provided, we are aware of, and so please don't just get up and recite verbatim what you did last time. The proposal has changed some, and if we can kind of focus in on those changes, I'd appreciate it both from the applicant and from the neighbors. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Once again, Charles Marlis with Kensington School. The Reverend Kurt from Unity Church and some of his congregants would like to come up and do a brief presentation. They felt that in some of the past appearances that we've had, they haven't really quite had to have a chance to have their story told in the progression of, how we came to an agreement. So I'll bring Reverend Kurt up for a little bit, and he can speak to you all, and then we can go from there. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck. Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Kurt Condra at Unity on the North Shore. I've been the senior minister there since 2010 when I moved to Evanston. Do you want my address? I live on Hinman, not too far away. So first, thank you for allowing us this opportunity to really share our process and how we came to really the realization, I think, that Kensington School is a good buyer for the property that we're selling. I'd like to share a little bit about Unity, who we are. Unity is a spiritual movement that was founded back in the late 1800s by a couple, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. Our headquarters remains there now. World headquarters is there, right outside of Kansas City. Unity North Shore is sort of a completely independent nonprofit organization under the umbrella of Unity Worldwide Ministries. So unlike other churches, we don't have a denominational or a diocesan kind of way of supporting. All of our finances comes through the fundraising efforts and the generosity of our members and donors. So that kind of gets to where we are in terms of how we came to the decision that it was time for us to sell the property. It was not an easy process for us. As you can imagine, it's been our home there for 60 years. 4 generations of families have had to sort of contend with what it means for us as we change and move on to something different. Unity was founded by a woman named Maud Kellogg back in 1955, and she met in a meeting room at the Evanston Hotel on Main Street for a number of years, and then garnered enough support and following that they were in the ballroom for a while, and they raised the money to acquire the property at 3434 Central, and in 1960, they opened the doors for the building that is there now on Christmas Eve. So that's kind of how we got to where we are. What we came to realize about 5 years ago is that there are some tremendously expensive infrastructure changes that need to be made, improvements, everything from HVAC to plumbing to electrical, the roof, and there's just a lot that needed to be handled and maintained. And, thank you. And through a kind of discernment process, we went through and finally realized that it really is not probably within the scope of our 50 or so members to be able to afford the kinds of changes that are required for us to really complete our mission and fulfill the purpose that we have in the world. So the congregation voted at that point to put the property on the market. As a part of that process, we contracted with a consultant to help us kind of set some criteria by which we would be able to choose a suitable buyer and at the same time be able to choose where we want to move. I do want to make that point. There are some rumors around town that we are closing. That is not the case. We're moving. We'll use the proceeds out of the sale to remain in Evanston and to continue doing the work that our members so much value here. So back to sort of this process of how we're going to identify a buyer that was suitable. Unity, as I said, has been there for 60 years. We're very proud of the relationships that we've had within the community and feel as though we have been a good neighbor and wanted to make sure that as we leave the property, especially since we're staying in Evanston, that legacy continues. So we were very deliberate about entertaining the offers that came before us. In the several months that the property was on the market, there were really only 3 offers that we evaluated fully. 2 of those were for some fairly high-density multi-family developments that were from other developers from out of town. And then the third buyer was Chuck Marlis with Kensington Schools. which right away felt like a good fit. It sort of fits with what we had wanted to do in terms of a ministry for 60 years. We wanted to equip and empower folks to live, purposeful, meaningful lives. And though they're doing it with preschool kids, it's sort of a legacy that continues. The operation seems not unlike a church in terms of the hours of operation and the kinds of uses that the building would be using. So we just felt that it was a really good fit for us being able to continue our work and also to be respectful and mindful and honoring of the energies that were around in the neighborhood and beyond. Also, part of our next slide, do I have this clicker? Thank you. Next slide. Part of our I read a statistic yesterday that 10,000 churches across the country closed in 2001. So this isn't a dynamic that is unfamiliar to churches. And especially since COVID, we're finding new ways to meet and gather and grow and experience fellowship together. And that's all sort of having an impact on what our needs are, and in particular, what we are looking to create as we move out of this particular structure. And let's see, I think that's about all I needed to cover. Our mission really, as I mentioned, is to equip and empower folks to be able to take risks and be courageous and live their deepest truth. And we feel that Kensington, as a buyer, as a family-owned business and that's going to continue to kind of serve others, is a really wonderful fit for the property that we've identified. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to our executive director, Jasmine Sasek. She's also a former trustee board president.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, commissioners. I grew up going to Unity on the North Shore. I think I first walked in the doors when I was about 12 years old. And so throughout my adult life, I have had the opportunity to both work and volunteer there, and now serve as the executive director. In addition to that, my husband and I did live in Evanston a number of years ago when we were starting our family. We have six kids. We actually adopted most of them through foster care, and so early childhood education is near and dear to my heart personally, because I see what the older kids who we got who missed out on those early opportunities, how incredibly impactful that is in their lives. And as a family who has moved several times, how important it has been looking for those educational opportunities for our family and in looking for a town to live in. That is something that's so valuable. So I want to just talk a little bit about what Kensington brings to the neighborhood, part of why we kind of partnered with them, thinking that this would be maybe an ideal new business in Evanston, and help support our church's desire and need to relocate at this time. So that their philosophy, their mission really helps, shares what we embody as a Unity Church. Their building plan is certainly attractive. And I know one of the concerns we've heard over the last 18 months or so from some of the neighbors has been about how it might affect property values. And we certainly want to be a good steward of our neighborhood. We do not want to negatively impact our neighbors in any way with new development there. So we did look into property values in the area. And as you can see here, Evanston is known for its good schools. Home values have risen 12% since 2017, 54% over the past 10 years, which is incredible. Sales data in our ward specifically show home prices increased an average of 23.6% since the Little Green Treehouse School opened in 2017. Meanwhile, unfortunately, the co-op that is adjoining our property, their property values have been stagnant for the last 10 years. So we are hoping that perhaps this can change that. When you look at where some other Kensington schools are located, Glenview area code 60025 increased by 22.5%, whereas the surrounding community decreased by 20.5% after the Kensington school opened there. Arlington Heights area code 6004 increased by 11.6%, whereas the surrounding community only increased by 3.4%. And the Hinsdale area code 60521 increased by 23.3%, whereas the surrounding community actually decreased by 20.5%. I'm going to ask one of our board members to come up and present the remainder of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Commissioners, and thank you to the people who've cared enough about this topic to attend tonight. I just would like to I'm Alyssa Foster, and I am the Vice President of the Board of Unity on the North Shore. Just a note about my appearance tonight, I had eye surgery today. I'm really fine, so I will just move on from there. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that this sort of commercial sale process is not familiar to most of us who are on a church board. And so we have worked very hard to make sure that we are addressing all of the state and city official needs, and that we're looking into things like property values and traffic patterns and so forth, and following the process with the integrity that we bring to everything that we do as a church community, including communicating with our neighbours. I'm here to speak particularly to traffic patterns, which of course is a huge concern. As many people know, that corner is a little bit diabolical. There are multiple streets converging onto two close traffic lights and so forth. And the hillside neighbours are somewhat protected from that, and I understand that they are concerned about increasing traffic because of the presence of the school. What I will say is that what I've learned from our buyer is that around Kensington School, they really have a proven track record of safe operations. As an operator of early childhood, they have to be particularly careful about traffic for the children and the parents coming to and from. They also don't really operate in the same way as a regular school would. I think that's a point that people really need to understand, is that a preschool, and I'm a parent myself, my kiddo is now 12, but when she was in preschool, we went to two different places. One was in Edgewater and Andersonville, and her entry was right on Clark Street, which is an extraordinarily busy street, and there were only 4 spots right in front of the building for drop-off and pickup. And I was like, how could this possibly work? And I was very nervous as a young, mother of a young child. But they said, it works. We've worked it out. It works. Everything will be fine. And so when I see the arrangement of the traffic pattern that they've put in here, the fact that you actually can drive in, can stop, can unload your kiddo, and then, go on your way. And the fact that parents work at different times, and they will come some of them will come at 6, some of them will come at 9:30. It's not like when we drop off at school, and there's a long line of cars and everybody's trying to drop off in a 10-minute window. So that's one of the things that I think is really important to realize. So rather than just taking, our sort of general impressions of this, a traffic study was actually done in order of the Kensington School drop-off and pick-up times in 10-minute increments, and the highest number of cars was in that 10-minute period was 7. And more typical was 1 to 3 vehicles per 10-minute period. So this worry about there being hundreds of cars lining up and blocking the traffic is not really supported by the evidence that we have. The other thing I wanted to speak to was the design of the Kensington Schools building. I understand completely the concern about the loss of green space around the church. And there will be certainly a loss of green space, but that doesn't mean that the designers of the school haven't really thought about the aesthetics of that property as well. It'll be a different aesthetic, but I believe they are intending for there to be plenty of greenery around for the kids, and landscaping to keep the beautification there. The roof line of the proposed building is actually lower than we have at the church right now. It looks more residential than our church. I mean, it's an interesting looking church, but the school itself looks more like a home. We've also thought very carefully about the easement situation with our Williamsburg neighbours, and the most recent plan actually dedicates an easement to that property, which is something that they haven't actually had before. That was Chuck Marlis's suggestion specifically. You can see up here, I won't go through it in detail, the different parts of the design regarding ingress and egress, but all of those changes have been made with an eye to maintaining the peace of the neighbourhood and the access for the Williamsburg neighbours next door. Finally, we have worked with city engineers and state officials to consider that any actual increase in traffic that does happen can be managed by timing of the lights to, according to what is actually observed once the school is open. And Kensington School will pay for any of those timing adjustments themselves. Kensington School has also planned to extend the sidewalks, which is, again, another safety concern of the neighbourhood, but they're going to extend the sidewalk along the property line, and they will be providing new access to the co-op residents specifically. And as we understand it, there's ongoing citywide improvement. The City of Evanston will actually be constructing new sidewalks on both sides of Central Street around the neighbourhood. That wraps up my portion of what I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your time, Commissioners, and I'm going to turn it back over to Reverend Kurt to bring us home, as you will.
Thanks, Alyssa. I understand how difficult change is. I've been preaching about change now for going on 3 years as we sort of move through this process. And I know that sort of the natural human reaction is to kind of be resistant and to look for the things that are not gonna serve us well. And yet what I believe is that, and what Unity teaches and believes, is that there is no private good. That if a solution arises that is good for one of us, and that's been our intention throughout this process, it's also good for the neighbors, it's also good for the broader Evanston community. I really think that Kensington School will preserve the wonderful sort of quiet character of the Hillside neighborhood. I know that as a business, it will add to the city's tax revenues, and I know that it will give us the opportunity at Unity on the North Shore to be able to move into a more suitable home with accommodations and features that are going to really help us to fulfill our mission. So once again, thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity for us to share our process. And I know if you have questions or data, we have folks here who can speak more directly to some of the statistics that are in the back of the packet that you received.
Are there any questions for the members of Unity before? All right, Mr. Marlis.
Great, thanks. Thank you all very much. Just to sum up, and thank you to Chair Rogers for suggesting that we just kind of pick up where we all left off perhaps a year ago. I'm once again joined by some of my development team, which is my architect, Lance Lauderdale, Michael Worthman from KLOA, our traffic consultant, and Jim Kapustiak, our civil engineer from Spaceco. All those things that we just touched on, I think the most important one today is the easement issue that we are all trying to find a good solution for. So this is the third version of this plan that we've created, basically to try and find a way to blend what the needs are for Kensington from a zoning perspective and a land use perspective to what works best for the neighbors and what works best for the community. And we've been basically very reactive to what the community's needs were with all three different proposals that we've worked on, and we've met with the neighbors and we've shown them all to you. So this last site plan that we've worked with, I believe. Do we have it here? Okay. It's in the package, I believe, that you all have. Going through the progression of these three different site plans, our first iteration of this plan was to try and keep the parking lot where it currently stands, build Kensington upon the current site. And while that worked for some neighbors, it worked for, from an easement perspective, it worked for the Williamsburg Cooperative because their easement basically easement rights maintained, they were the same. But some of the folks that lived south and west of this location were worried that a lot of the left turn outs onto Central would, a lot of folks would be using Central to kind of get back south onto Grosse Pointe to get to the highway faster. We subsequently came up with a different opinion or a different iteration of the plan, whereby we put the parking out on the corner and we created two different points of ingress egress. One ingress egress point out on Central, which was a right out left in only restricted, and a second access point onto Grosse Pointe, which was kind of a 3/4. It was a right in, right out, left in. And at the recommendation of this committee, I believe, we went back and revisited that again. And now our third plan is I think our best one of all. Basically, it's allowing the Williamsburg Co-op to have their own dedicated access point with full access onto Central, their own driveway, and their own access. They won't be driving through a parking lot. They won't be having to deal with Unity's parking lot, whether it's paved or plowed or whatnot, or Kensington's parking lot for the same reasons, but now they have their own dedicated one. And we further restricted access out onto Grosse Pointe, where it's just a right in, right out only, and out on Central, it still stays that left in, right out. So there'll be no left turns out onto Central to go through the neighborhoods, and quite frankly, any parent or any guardian or any family member that wants to get out onto Grosse Pointe and get to the highway quicker will just simply avoid Central and avoid that light altogether and just make that quick right-hand turn out onto Grosse Pointe and start heading south. So everything else from the last time we were here visiting you from with regard to the operation of the school and the traffic patterns, the drop-off and pickups are all pretty much the same. We have made some subtle tweaks to parking. We're still parking compliant. And we obviously have some landscaping and some land use issues. Dedicating this dedicated easement to the co-op has taken out that drive aisles impervious surface out of our calculations, so we saw our impervious calculation go up. So because that was, prior to that, that was dedicated playground space. So we've reduced the playground for the children and have given that over to the co-op so they can, have an easement that works for them for the next 60 years plus. So at that, I think I'll just turn it over to whomever has any questions, any clarifying questions for Unity or for myself or any of my team. We are at your disposal.
Commissioner Westerberg.
So if we can talk about the easement a little bit, and I'm not sure if this question is for you or whether it's for staff, but can the church, in essence, vacate that easement if it sells the property? Or do they have to, is it legal they have to provide the easement somewhere else in kind? Or is the actual position of the easement something that the co-op can lay claim to?
Good evening, members of the Land Use Commission, Chair Rogers, Alexandra Ruggie, Deputy City Attorney. It is the city's position that as long as, so the easement is created by necessity in this situation. So as long as an easement exists that allows for this necessity, that is all that the Land Use Commission should consider. That's all that's necessary here. Any other issue about where it's located, if that's agreed upon, that'll be a civil issue between the two property owners. But for our purpose here this evening, an easement just has to be given because it is a necessity. So the advice given by staff was to not accept a proposal unless it included an easement that would allow for those property owners to access the property that they need to access. And I believe that staff received a proposal that did have a new easement on it, and that's why we're here tonight.
Commissioner Halleck.
Position, but the city must realize that if this isn't worked out legally, then the plan may change totally, and it'll just come back to us, and we'll be going around and around.
Yes.
You must realize that.
Yeah, yes, and that's, I mean, it's an agreement between two parties, and if they either come to agreements or don't, and if they don't, then we have to keep going through this until such time that they do, if it changes the proposal. Yeah, Commissioner Halleck.
Given that, you know, your lack of green space, which people have commented on, and some of the variations that you're asking for, which are site-related, and the testimony that said that this current scheme is lower than the church. I don't know how much lower it is, but did you consider, or would you consider a three-story building? And I don't know how tall that would be relative to the church, but it would also, is it possible to shrink your floor plates so then you get more space for some of the things that you're asking for?
You know, we hadn't. It would more than likely add another 16 to 18 feet with the different floor heights and requirements. It wouldn't be the best way to operate a child care center from the perspective of trying to get children up 3 flights of stairs, or in case of, you know, emergency, down 3 flights of stairs. You know, we have a couple other 2-story locations, you know, one out in St. Charles and one in LaGrange. I've never thought about doing 3 before, but yeah.
I have a question.
I have one over here, but I have to count down who it is, since names don't match. Commissioner Westerberg.
Just a couple of questions. The refuse enclosure, is that something that you could have included in the building? Was there a specific reason to have it out in the parking area?
Well, it's to have it inside the building is a little difficult for, you know, for facilities management to come pick up a garbage collection service to come pick it up. We like to try and keep the building looking as residential as possible, to have windows in the classrooms, you know, for all the children to attach or to carve out a piece of the structure for, you know, a dumpster corral. Really probably isn't the best use of the space for, you know, to be taken away from the children, especially on the first floor. It's not something we've ever done before or has ever been suggested that we do before. And I don't know, is that allowed from a zoning perspective to have a, you know, dumpster inside a building? I don't know.
We certainly had it.
We have it in this building, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, okay. We hadn't considered it. It's not something from an operational perspective that we'd want to include in the plan.
My only concern is that the enclosure itself is located very close to that exit entry off of Grosse Pointe.
Yeah.
So it's going to just require coordination in terms of when you bring in the garbage trucks, do the pickups, get them out of there.
Correct.
So that it doesn't interfere with circulation. So that was
Of course.
just a concern.
Yeah, it'll be well surrounded, well landscaped around. We'll build an enclosure around it. Some municipalities require to have a roof over it. I don't know what the granular details are of that. But however, we, you know, are asked to, you know, protect that from visibility and from smell and odor and all that, we'll be mindful of it for sure.
All right. And then can you address, you've got 35 parking spaces that you're providing.
Yes.
You've got 23 staff members.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Approximately, yeah.
And they would be parking there?
They will, yes.
So just if you can explain, does that really leave you with enough spaces for parents who may want to pull in and park and walk their children in, and how that will work out?
It does. So first of all, this is code compliant. So your ordinance does list a number of, I believe it's one per employee and one for every 15 children or something like that. So we do comply from a zoning perspective. Furthermore, we do have some other locations out in the suburbs that have a similar enrollment with a similar sized parking lot. So for example, we just opened a school in Park Ridge in January of 2023. It's a 17,000 square foot building on 1 story. It has 10 classrooms. This will have 10 classrooms as well. It has 31 parking spaces. And this has 35. So from an operational perspective, you know, the drop off and the pickup, I remember Commissioner Halleck had some concerns in our last meeting as it related to What happens if there's a sudden flood of families that come at one point or another? We've run some, well, that's on the other slide, and I believe that's in the packet. We collected data from 2 of our other locations that are a little bit smaller than this, but on a ratioed level, show that parents do drop off in dribs and drabs over that 3 or 4 hour morning window, and similarly that 3 or 4 evening window for pickup. And as that morning enrollment builds, so does that staff enrollment. So the school will open in the morning at 6:30, let's say, and maybe only 4 employees will show up, because we don't need all 23 staff members there when the school enrollment is building, because as children are coming from 6:30 in the morning until 9:30 or 10, those staff members start trickling in because of DCFS ratioing from a student-teacher ratio perspective. And the same happens in the evening. As children start to leave, once ratio starts to establish a need for teachers to leave, they go home, because there's really no need for them to stay, after the ratio doesn't require. So it is a really nice ebb and flow, and this is evidenced in all other 14 of our locations throughout Chicagoland. And even for the city locations, as Jasmine mentioned, not that there's a strong correlation, but in the city of Chicago, we're building a location in Lincoln Park. We only have 4 little loading zones out on Lincoln Avenue that will need to be enough for all the parents that are coming and going. So we feel very strongly that this will be enough.
Commissioner Merenchev?
I just had a follow-up question to this. I'm sorry. But I thought you mentioned this before, but couldn't you, if there was a rush situation, couldn't you have staff outside picking up the kids directly from the car, and so the car doesn't have to park, the parent doesn't have to park?
Of course, yeah.
I thought you mentioned that last time.
And look, and that's the thing. So, what's wonderful about this is that the parents that are in our community are really wanting to be good members of our community. And we want to be good members to Evanston. So it kind of works up the chain, right? The parents want to be a good member of the Kensington community. Kensington wants to be a good member of Evanston as a community. So if we start to see things that aren't working and start to see things that from an operational perspective are problematic for the neighborhood, for traffic, we can make some adjustments. It's very different than, if any other user or any other, commercial or residential development were to come here. We're a 54-year-old family-owned and operated company. We plan on being here for a long time, for the foreseeable future, decades. So we want to be a good neighbor. We want to be a good steward of this property. We want to make sure that, any possible exigency that comes up that is problematic is addressed. So to answer your question, yeah, we'll bring some people outside. We'll do what it takes to make sure it works. But, time, it's a little battle tested. Kensington's drop off and pickup has been working really, really well for decades at a lot of locations. So we're really confident that this will be fine.
Commissioner Merenchev?
I have 2 questions. Usually when a project like this is started, you give the architect your program starting with number of students and number of personnel. How did you determine the number of students that it will be 165? Let's call them kids. Will it be possible that this is smaller number for this place?
At this point, it's not possible that it's smaller. How the way we determined that was, seeing that this is a 2-story building, basically anything you do on the first floor, you have to do on the second floor. I mean, we could make the second floor smaller, but it really wouldn't work. I mean, it'd be, it wouldn't be practical. So we basically worked from the outside in designing this. We understood that the site had certain limitations from a parking size location, and we basically just tried to build as attractive a building as we could on the site that met our needs from an operational perspective, and from quite simply a demand perspective of how we see that the need that childcare has for Evanston. I know that there's been some discussion about there's quite a bit of childcare in the Evanston community, and that while that's true, the Little Green Treehouse is on a waiting list. The Goddard School in Skokie down the street is on a waiting list. And, you know, I'm not really sure about the Bright Horizons in downtown Evanston, but that's 15, 20 minutes away during traffic. So not a lot of folks from this neighborhood will be going over to Bright Horizons. So there's a strong need and you know, a very strong need for childcare. So to have a larger
So
center.
do I understand that you have some, let's call it study, and your programming is based on real demand, and you are sure that this number is justified?
I am, yeah, and I believe I provided that once.
The
or years
second
ago.
question is, you have 23 people personnel
Yes.
for 165 students. As far as I know, the general government guidelines are in ratio 1:3, 1 personnel to 3 toddlers, up to 1:8 students when it comes to grades. Your ratio is somewhere about 1:7, which means that you probably will need more personnel. Can you defend your number?
Yes, so, so the infant ratio is 1:4, the toddler is 1:3, the twos is 1:8, and children over 3 is 1:10. So many of these rooms will only have 2 teachers, at virtually the entire second floor will only have 2 teachers. So there'll be 1 infant room with 3 teachers, 2 toddler rooms with 4 teachers. So the way that this building's been planned and constructed will yield, you know, 23 staff members.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Linville?
Yes, I think this is both for you and for Unity. Obviously, the easement to the co-op to the south is really kind of a critical piece in the approval. Can you, both of you, describe kind of the interactions you've had with co-op and where, you know?
Sure.
And in particular, you know, would you go back to the first alternative that does not address their easement at all, that leaves it in place?
Sure. So, like I said, a strong reason for these 3 plans being 3 separate plans has been to address this easement issue. You know, the first plan worked wonderfully. However, it really it didn't work for the entirety of the neighborhood, because what happened for that first plan was that we didn't have access we couldn't get access out onto Grosse Pointe at all because of the location of the current parking lot as it stands. Thereby, we'd have full access out onto Central. You know, that was a plan that we presented to the neighborhood. We had a neighborhood meeting at the church. You know, to be frank, I don't recall there being a lot of opposition from the co-op, but there was substantial opposition from the neighborhood. The second easement, or the second site plan, I should say, was an effort to address that issue from the entirety of the neighborhood, 50, 100 residents up and down those streets that were really worried about parents making a left-hand turn onto Central and kind of cutting that corner to get onto Grosse Pointe to get down to the highway when they were trying to get to work, if they needed to get to the highway to get to work. And that plan, you know, it mollified the neighborhood to a certain extent, but in turn, the co-op came back and said, we're not in favor of this at all. We really don't like this. You know, you're forcing us to now, you know, go through your parking lot to get up to Central and make a right out only. You're forcing us to only make a right out onto Grosse Pointe. You know, that really doesn't work for us. So then this third iteration basically, I think, is, you know, a better solution than the co-op currently has right now. They're not going to need to go through a parking lot of you know, someone else's design or someone else's maintenance or someone else's, you know, issue. You know, if the church decides to move and, you know, move their congregation, and this building is sitting here, and you know they'll essentially be plowing the snow plowing the parking lot for the easement. There's just a lot of different things that are going to go on there. This way, you know, we've created this easement specifically for the co-op. It's paved, it's got a curb, drainage, the whole shooting match, and it has full access, left out, right in, left in, on Central. It really is, you know, a wonderful case scenario. I don't know how conversations have been going between, the attorneys for Unity and the attorneys for the co-op. I don't know if there's been much discussion. I know we've sent this plan to them. I believe they may still not be in favor of it. I think they might not be in favor of this plan at all. Fortunately, the easement discussion is a difficult one, especially if you have someone that just doesn't like the plan to begin with. So, Reverend, has there been any other discussion with the folks?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. So in terms of what our working relationship has been with Williamsburg Co-op, is that what you're curious about?
Kind of. I mean, obviously, to sell the property, whoever buys the property, whatever the plan is, either the easement that's existing, the current easement has to stay in place, which is only 16 feet wide, so I'm not quite sure, it's not 20 feet like it is on this proposed plan. But, can you, has that been an impediment to the developers that potential purchasers you've discussed? Have you been discussing, alternate easements with First Williamsburg?
We have attempted to reach out to, especially Peter Rutan is the president of the co-op over there, and we've had a wonderful relationship for a number of years. He's been very generous with us, and we've shared a lot in terms of, plowing, all that stuff. For a long time, they had more cars than they had parking spaces, and we had plenty of parking space, so they were just using our space. We have tried to reach out a number of times. In fact, I think as part of when it got to the point of involving lawyers, there was a whole sort of log of all of the interactions and the conversations and the emails that had been back and forth. And we just really never got to a space where it felt like there was any receptivity. So at some point, we stopped inviting, I think it was at their attorney's request, that all of our communication be directed through the attorneys. So that's pretty much what's the dynamic that's been in place for about the last year or so.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Mr. Worthington, I hate for you to have to come and sit through a meeting and not present to us. You're getting frequent flyer miles with us recently, I think.
Yes.
If we could go to the screen, I don't know who has control over, the one that shows the actual site plan. This page. Yes. Could you explain to us a little bit about traffic movement in and out of here, and then I'll come back with a couple specific questions for you.
Okay. So the access drive on Central in the southeast corner, that will be right in, right out. The last plan that we presented was full access, and I think you've all seen there was a letter from IDOT that didn't want full access. They wanted right in, right out. The eastern drive on Central, that was going to be a right out only. Without that left turn in, we need to get some access from northbound Central. So that inbound will be for left turns only. And that will be done by signage, and we will probably modify that plan to provide that channelization like you see for the right turnout only. Not to square it off, but to provide that angle to further direct people. So it will be a left in and a right out. And we'll do that with signage and channelization. It doesn't show it well on this site plan, and I apologize, but we'll work with your staff. I wasn't at the DAPR meeting, but I understand everyone's pretty comfortable with that. And then the far drive is the easement. I believe it's 20 feet, correct me if I'm wrong, two-way traffic, which is fine for the low volume of traffic that they're going to have. That will be a full access like it is now. So those are the three drives. Anyone who wants to go south on Grosse Pointe, we foresee them using the right out. That's the quickest way. They don't have to go to the central light. Anyone going back to the north will take, Central out and use that traffic signal. Same with anyone who wants to go back downtown and take Central. You know, we're looking at maybe about 45 trips doing that in the peak hour. That's about 1 or 2 every cycle. So you're only adding 1 or 2 vehicles every cycle. There's more than enough capacity and green time to accommodate that traffic. There's really very little traffic on that portion of Central right now. So there is sufficient capacity to accommodate it. As you guys all know, it's an interesting intersection, and the east leg and the west leg of Central works on a split phase. They don't go at the same time because you have that dual left. So you do wait a little longer, but you get out on each signal phase. So there's sufficient capacity to get out at that location.
And is there concern for the, I'll call it the easternmost entrance on Central? You're saying that's a left-in only.
Right.
So if, how does that work with any traffic standing at lights?
So that drive is, let me tell you how far away it is. I don't want to misrepresent. That is about 250 feet from the center of Central. So it's probably got 200 feet of stacking, 180 feet of stacking, even call it 150. You can accommodate 6 cars there before it even blocks the driveway. And like I said, we're looking at 2 or 3 a cycle at the most. And there's very little traffic there now. So we don't foresee it as a queuing issue backing up past there. And if our traffic's coming out, and let's say we have a surge at one time, it's going to back up into our drive, so it's not going to be affecting that left turn in anyways. But we don't foresee that. I mean, we're talking 45 cars over an hour. That's less than 1 a minute coming out of there. So, and, you know, I understand the question, Mr. Halleck, last time about, you know, a surge of traffic, but they really don't get them here. I mean, there was some graphs in the back that shows the check-in of the kids, and it's pretty flat. I mean, they're coming in, but it's over that 2.5-hour period. So they're coming in, but it's really no peak. And if you look at those graphs, and those are actually children coming in. And some of those are with parents that have 2 children, so it doesn't necessarily mean it's 1 car. But it was 2, 1, 2, 1, maybe 3, 2, 1 every couple minutes. And there was a peak of 7, maybe at one point, or 6. But we have in excess of 12 parking spaces. All the parents are supposed to park unless we get into the issue that we talked about. And, you know, I've been working with Chuck since '95. All of his schools operate the same way. None of them have issues. We've gone through many communities who've had all these same questions. And Chuck, he can testify more than me, really hasn't had any issues. None of the communities have been upset. It's really been a great asset for them.
And then one last question. How wide is the access drive that's on the west side, on the western end of Central Street there that would be used by the co-op? How wide is that drive? The easement is 20. How wide is the drive?
How wide's the drive?
16, so it is a,
No. Drive is,
21 back-to-back,
all right, thank
Yeah.
you.
which is wide enough.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure, because it looks smaller than the easement there, and I wanted to make sure what we were doing.
I think the easement's going outside of the actual curves of the road.
does the easement include the transition strip? It does, doesn't it? 26?
I'm gonna ask you to come up, just so you can be at a microphone, so we can pick you up for the record.
Introduce yourself.
My name's Lance Lauderdale. I'm the architect for Kensington School. I live in Hinsdale. Depending on where the transition strip should be defined, I know it's a 10-foot transition strip, but we have 5 feet from the west property line, we have essentially 5 feet of soil, green space with some existing trees that now would most likely be preserved. And then the curb, the drive, and then the back of curb. So and then the playground, which that's why we're asking for relief on that side, because if we've got the 5 feet of transition on the west side of the drive and not on the playground side. That's why we're asking for a reduction there.
Is it 5 or is it 6 feet? I think on the plan that I was looking at, I believe it's 6 feet with this strip.
Okay.
So it's a 26-foot easement? Is that,
That's what's proposed right now. And so how much of that is actually green space with about a 6-inch curb, 5.5 feet,
Okay.
6 feet, right around
all
there.
right, thank you.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yeah, this is this is not a question, it's really a statement.
Okay.
And I'm repeating probably what I said last time, and what I said last time is I drive this route coming west on Central and then turning on Grosse Pointe just about every day.
Okay.
And I can tell you, those lights, it's a cluster. It's just awful there. And so I guess my question is, have you had conversations with IDOT or whoever is responsible for that, the lights in that intersection, or is this down the road? And I'm sure it's really not our purview anyway, but I think that part of the solution here is those lights.
I think IDOT and the city have looked at it over years and years, and I think they have come to a point where they think they have the most efficient signal timing. Let me finish. I don't disagree with you, but it's very difficult when you have a 6-legged intersection like we have here. You know, it's the same problem in the city of Chicago when you got Milwaukee or Clybourne. It's very difficult to do it. You know, part of the conditions, you know, is us to look back at it. If there is issues with us stacking on Central or any queuing or any additional delay, Chuck is responsible for doing a retiming of the intersection, bringing someone out to look at it all to see if it needs to be changed. What the city and IDOT have done over the years, I'm not privy to, but I can tell you they're always looking at it. And I believe this is what they think is the best one, but we can look into it as we move forward, too. Yeah.
I have a question about the entrance, the eastern entrance on Central. How would you feel if that got changed to a right in, right out instead of a right out, left in?
I would think the neighbors would go crazy because they don't want that traffic going back down the neighborhood. And we want to be able to get our traffic in. Most of our traffic, well, probably 99% of our traffic is coming from Central or Grosse Pointe. So somehow we got to get anyone coming from the south in, and the easiest way is to make the left on Central and the left in. But like I said, Central carries a very, very low volume of traffic. The proximity of that drive and any queuing really shouldn't be an issue.
What will stop people from trying to come, let's say, from Greeley or Princeton and kind of work their way from the back of the neighborhood towards the school?
We're going to do everything we can to that driveway, from signage and channelization. The other is, you know, this is a private school. Chuck can carry a bigger hammer than most and, you know, work with his parents. They want to be good parents. If, you know, he wants to be a good neighbor. If there's stuff going on, I'm sure Chuck will give out his number to all the residents to make sure. Chuck's probably looking at me, but he wants to be a good neighbor. We've had a lot of these same concerns come up in other communities, and for the most part, they haven't materialized. You know, does someone do it once in a while? It's like the 90-10 rule I think I've talked to you about. 90% of the people follow the rules of the road. You know, there's 10% that don't, and we're going to try to narrow that down even further. And like I said, it's a private school, so, you know, you can carry a little more weight in punishing parents and those sort of things.
Another question, is there, and this might be for the applicant instead of you, but let me know, is there any kind of differentiation you make in terms of who's allowed to park in which spaces in order to make a differentiation between the staff and the parents?
No, we don't do that typically anywhere. But that's not to say that we're opposed to that, right? So if we realize that it's of benefit to the traffic pattern and the flows in and out of the school to have our staff members parking in that row of spaces along Grosse Pointe, to give parents a little more proximity to the front of the building, that's typically what happens anyway. The teachers tend to kind of park at a distance to give parents, easier access. They're not walking through a snowy parking lot with a car carrier or something like that. So, yeah, we can make any changes to it at any time.
But typically you don't formalize that?
No, we don't formalize it typically.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? If not, I'd like to move into testimony from the public. Commissioner Linwald, do you have one more question?
Yes, I think probably either the architect or the engineer, I'd like to get a little more clarification on there are two existing easements. There's a ComEd easement and then the one for First Williamsburg. And I'd kind of like to find out what utilities, especially that would have to be relocated. It looked like, depending on the plans, it was water and sewer, and how does that all work? And the same with the ComEd easement.
Yeah, I'm Jim Kapustiak, civil engineer from Spaceco, and based on our preliminary utility layout for this plan, currently in the existing easement, which falls basically dead center of the proposed location of the building, there's a water line that feeds the co-op, and there's also an adjacent sewer line. In addition to the egress to the parking lot, the sanitary service would be rerouted, through and follow basically the easement, the same easement as the proposed access along the west. And there's also, in terms of the water service, we have a couple options. The ones that we seems to be the most direct route to the city's water main grid is along Grosse Pointe Road, to reconnect the water service to the public main there. I believe there's also might be some dry utilities in that easement, maybe AT&T. I believe ComEd is overhead along the rear of the property, but again, that the details of that would be the final details of that would be worked out during the final design.
And that would be part of the easement agreement, I would presume? It would need to be? How does that all, I mean, because obviously...
Yeah, I mean, generally, if it's a utility that serves the co-op and it's routed through the school site, that would require an easement. So yes, that would be included in the easement agreement.
Okay, and then I was looking at, one of the Platte survey that was prepared by H.H. Bremer was in the packet, and it looks like there's a 20 feet closest to the west property line that doesn't look like it was in the First Williamsburg easement, and I was just kind of, but yet on our diagram that's in our packet on page 11, the easement goes all the way to the west property line, and I was curious about that.
I don't have it. If it's in the,
It was in one of the later exhibits toward the end.
so the way I understand it, there's a couple of easements like you were talking about, and on those surveys, it follows the south property line from Grosse Pointe, about 15 feet, and then on that point of the property where it turns, it follows back towards the west down that angled property line. So that's a utility easement, if you will. So that's the two, let's say. And
Right.
then there's the other easement that is not well defined anywhere on the surveys, for the driveway access to the north. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the third easement.
But there was, on one of the drawings, there was, the easement ended, and then there was 20 feet between the end of the easement and the property line.
That would be on my drawing.
Commissioner Linwall, do you happen to know which sheet that was so I can pull it up?
No. It was past,
Just toward the front of the packet?
no, it was toward the end. It was a hand-drawn, it was really kind of a hand-drawn survey sheet.
Do
It
either
was-
of you know the sheet number and I can scroll to it?
It was done by H.H. Bremer. So it was after the Alta survey. I think it was right after the Alta. No, not that, I was,
Is this it?
yes.
Okay, that was probably done 60 or 70 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
And I don't-
and right down at that corner, you've got 20 feet that I don't know.
That, we don't even know if that was recorded. The latest survey that was done has all the actual recorded easements
Okay.
for the property. This was done, there's a lot of other information on this, if you look closely, that was never built and was never installed. This was a proposed survey from that long ago.
Okay.
We did go to the Cook County records to try to find anything we could on those, and we couldn't. That survey didn't completely make sense in their records.
Okay. It didn't make sense to me either.
Any other questions for the applicant at this point? If not, we will move on to taking public testimony. I have 20 people who have signed up to speak, 15 of whom are within the notification district and 5 of whom are not. According to our rules, the chair gets to decide amounts of time for public speaking, and the chair will grant 3 minutes per speaker for those who live within the defined area and 2 minutes for those who live without of that area. So I will call names, and please come up. Again, say your name for the record. If I mispronounce it, I will apologize in advance. The first speaker I have signed up is Leslie Brown, and I'm going to go through the people who get 3 minutes first, so I'll skip over those who don't live within the defined area.
Hi, thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Leslie Brown, and I live directly across the street from the proposed planned development, which is Kensington School at 3517 Central Street. To start, I am here in opposition to this proposal, full stop. For every planned development proposal, there must be compatibility with the city's adopted comprehensive general plan. Of the many items that must be considered, I will address a few that are critical to me and this discussion. Essential character of the neighborhood, land use intensity, traffic impact, and parking. When the church was built on the property in 1960, it was their goal to blend into this community of modest, mid-century homes. In terms of size, scope, and design, the building and its uses worked in harmony with the neighborhood. Kensington School, 3 times in size, scope, and vastly more intense in its use of the land, is completely out of alignment with the current neighborhood. There is nothing in its current design that mirrors the neighbors across the street. Most of our neighborhood streets have no sidewalks. If they do, and I'm sorry, we've heard nothing from our aldermen that they're building more sidewalks. If they do, the sidewalk is a fraction of the size of regular sidewalks. Every day, our children walk in the street to get to the buses. People walk their animals in the street, and folks with mobility challenges are forced to use the street because the sidewalk, if available, is inadequate to their needs. At the same time, you have a school with 165 kids and 23 employees and service vehicles to handle catering and garbage that is nearly 400 cars a day from Kensington that will drive in and out of our neighborhood. This is so enormously unsafe. When you add the thousands of cars that race around the turn from Grosse Pointe, and the fact that Kensington has only been granted a possibility of a right turn in and a right turn out of the parking lot off Grosse Pointe. In order to turn right on Kensington's parking lot, all of our back streets will be used to access that parking lot from the north. Please do the math and envision how that impacts our neighborhood. Accidents and traffic congestion will become a daily issue, and for what? In the proposal, Kensington states it will serve Evanston's working families. Childcare tuition at Kensington starts at $26,000 per year. There are already 14 childcare centers within 3 miles of our neighborhood, and the folks that truly and sincerely need the childcare in Evanston will most likely never be able to afford that price tag. This isn't a proposal to serve our residents. It's a proposal to serve as a throughway for our wealthier neighbors from the north to drop off their kids on the way to the expressway, as Mr. Marlis referred to. I will end with this. I want the church to be able to sell and get out from underneath whatever they need that they've incurred. I am not a naysayer just to be a naysayer, but this current proposal is a disaster on so many levels. If the church had taken the time to engage stakeholders, which I'm sorry, whatever they said about meeting with neighbors is patently false. We've had one meeting in just over 2 years, and it was opened with a statement of thank you for coming out in support, never considering what our concerns were. If the church had taken the time to engage the stakeholders, we could have been helpful in many ways. For example, housing, which is badly needed in Evanston, could have been discussed. Instead, my multiple emails to Kurt have been ignored and declined to meet in person to collaborate, and as a consequence, we now have a proposal that negatively impacts our community. Please don't recommend this for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker I have signed up is Brian Mahoney.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time and attention. I am Brian Mahoney. First, I have 3 points of order, which I put in my written comments. The first is that the residents of First Williamsburg did not receive written notice of this hearing per city rules. This hearing is therefore invalid. The second point is that the applicant has neither a legal or equitable interest in the property. He has only executory contract rights, so he's not an appropriate applicant. Third, there's an ambiguity in the application as to whether it's on behalf of an individual, Mr. Marlis, or corporation. On page 2, he says it's an individual. He also fills out in the disclosure statement, page 6 of 6, an indication of a corporation. I ran a search last night in the Secretary of State. There's no reference for Marlis or Kensington. I don't know if there is such a corporation, if the city has vetted that, if there is a corporation, what its name is, or where it's domiciled or registered. So there are procedural infirmities here that render this hearing void, and the application should be done the proper way. Start again. If the church wants to make an application and have Mr. Marlis be his designee, as allowed by the application, they can do that. They did not do that. The whole process is invalid ab initio. With regard to the substance, I want to pick up on the great comments from Leslie. I can tell you, I attended a meeting at the Unity Church. I tried to engage Reverend Kurt. He told me he could not speak to me because he had been so advised by a broker for Greystone. So the notion that they tried to communicate with the co-op is simply not true, at least in large part and completely in my experience. Reverend Kirk just confirmed that there were 2 housing buyers who would have bought the property and developed housing, which is a very important need for Evanston. Those should have been pursued, and cooperation with the co-op should have been engendered to lead to a better result than the property that residents such as Leslie are so adamantly opposed to, and which would dramatically reduce the value of the co-op residences. There has been no easement agreement. The easement is a legal right. I'm the executor of the estate of Catherine Mahoney, who's deceased, who owns 2 shares in First Williamsburg Corporation. To the extent this application is approved, I would argue that it's a taking and would reduce the value of the property, and I will seek all legal redress I need to in that regard. The process here is deficient. The IDOT feedback and the plan do not make any sense. As Councilman Halleck mentioned, the traffic is terrible as of today. It's only going to get worse. The notion, as the consultant referenced, it's a 6-legged intersection. They're bad. They're bad as of today. They're only going to get worse. The notion of comparing Elmhurst or this Kensington property in Elmhurst or the one on Ogden, I believe it's in Hinsdale, is just intellectually disingenuous. Those are not comparable situations. The layout, the structure, the traffic, the absence of a 6-legged intersection, they're completely irrelevant. I will see that my time is over. I appreciate it. If there's time at the end, I'd like to speak more. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ruggie? Would you like to respond to any of the comments that were made about the appropriateness of the application? I don't know if you want to, or staff wants to respond to that in any way.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. I would just ask that staff confirms that notices were sent out per legal requirements.
The co-op property is one pin, and the taxpayer of record is First Williamsburg Co-op, and so the notice went to the taxpayer of record, consistent with state law and city ordinance.
Thank you. And as far as a legal interest, I believe as the land use hears many applications of prospective buyers of property, the city does consider a prospective buyer with a valid legal interest to make an application.
Thank you. The next speaker I have is Constant Porteous.
Thank you for pronouncing it correctly. It's not easy. Hi, as I said, I'm Constance Porteous, and thank you very much for allowing us to speak. I have lived for over 50 years.
Just a second.
Is that
She's-
it? I'm
No.
done?
3 minutes just flew by. Nope, she's resetting it. Sorry. Now you can begin.
Time flies when you're having fun. I've lived at that particular residence, 3600 Central Street, for over 50 years. I've had a good relationship with the church. However, I come to talk about the proposal. I've seen a change in the neighborhood, we all have, over the past 50 years. There are now more young families, more dogs and children, ages several months, not the dogs, but the children, months to teens as well as senior families. All of these groups walk at varying times and speeds in the street because there's never been, as has been stated, appropriate sidewalks for walking, and it is generally a quiet family neighborhood. If you add to this proposal 165 children, parents, cars, of course, staff, and service vehicles, this will create an enormous traffic pattern, and again, that has been underlined several times. Over the many years, the intersection of Grosse Pointe Road, Crawford Avenue, and Central Street, I have seen many, many accidents, and when I'm making a left-hand turn onto Central Street from Grosse Pointe Road, I have to wait. I hold 4 or 5 cars behind me, and this could be in the middle of the day. So take that in the morning. A couple of other issues, having been a director of an early childhood center, is the increase of garbage due to diapers, foodstuffs for the school, also loss of trees and shade in the area, though we've been told that there'll be replacements. And the playground, as I saw it on the plan, as proposed in the middle of the yard, has little or no shade due to the fact of where it's being placed. And in addition to the daily arrival of families, and I'll try to do this faster, there are events for families in the evenings. There are events, this is part of a school. There are events on weekends, which again adds to the traffic in the area. I thank you very much for listening, and that's all.
Thank you. Peter Rutan.
Hi, I'm Peter Rotan. I'm the president of First Williamsburg Corporation. I did want to mention that today I did get an email from Katie Ashbaugh. Is that the right way? Katie, hi. And I did respond with an email so that because I'm the president of the co-op, it's 12 units, that you gave me the opportunity. I appreciate that, to have more than 3 minutes, to have the 10 minutes because of being, so I just wanted to check with you whether that was sufficient.
Sure, you can,
Okay,
at the
okay.
discretion of Chair Rogers.
Yeah.
So normally what we do, and the idea behind, and you can stop his time here, I will restart it in a minute.
Yeah.
Typically what we do is if people cannot be present for a large group of people, we grant
see.
additional time.
Yeah.
I have a feeling many of your people you represent are also here in the neighborhood and will be, in the room and will be speaking.
Well, actually not. I don't think so. I think that a couple, but it could be. But in any case, I don't intend to use anything like 10 minutes. but it might go a minute or two over. I don't know if I can.
I'll give you a little.
Okay, thank
so
you.
when it
And I'll
starts
try to be
beeping, I'll
efficient.
stop. But
Thank you.
do
I
try to
appreciate
keep
it.
as close to
yes,
3
I
minutes
will
as
do
you
that.
can,
Thank
please.
you. Okay.
Thank you.
Firstly, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and it's great to see a lot of stakeholders here. And I wanted to say a couple of start with something. Let me get my notes here together here for a moment. I wanted to address just something that Commissioner Rogers, that you had mentioned earlier on. If I understood you, you mentioned that the proposal has been tweaked in certain ways, and you asked that we address ourselves kind of to the newer things, since you didn't want, going over the other things. I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because the proposal the proposal is still something that we consider at First Williamsburg, and I know that a lot of the neighbors consider to be something that is completely out of scale. I think Leslie was very comprehensive, and you took a lot of my thunder. Good job. Thank you. You made my job easier. But in any case, so I wanted to just address that the reason I'm speaking about these issues with the proposal is because I think that they're still very relevant, and that the proposal in itself is not something that will be positive for the neighborhood. I did want to read what First Williamsburg position on the easement, because I think there's been different kinds of ways of thinking about it, and I think there's different views. So I wanted to read a little bit about where we're coming from. I did want to mention that with the church, we wanted that the communication went directly to our council so that this could be handled in a professional way. It's nothing personal, but these are major decisions that we feel need to be made in a way that is most effective and that's made intelligently and to the benefit of the co-op and to the neighborhood. I've lived there for 12 years. My address is 2544 Grosse Pointe Road. I raised 2 children there, and it's a beautiful, lovely neighborhood. I do see kids walking down the street, biking down the street. I see little dogs walking alongside strollers, and this is going on very regularly. Commissioner Halleck, is it Halleck or Halick? Okay. When you spoke about going through there and seeing what it's really looking like, the traffic really feels like, I had a discussion with Mr. Griffith this last week, in which he said one of the things that we could bring is a sense of our lived experience of what the traffic is. And I can say that I have seen numerous either accidents or the glass that's being cleaned up. And whenever my kids were crossing the street, I remember when my son was in 6th grade, I was very nervous about him crossing that multiple street where it's Grosse Pointe Road and Central and Crawford, because there's cars coming from all angles. And the other thing is that people are in a hurry to get to the expressway. So there's kind of this flow that starts happening. People do rights on reds, et cetera. So that's a major concern. Already, to me, as Leslie said, the traffic is not even adequately safe for children or for adults. So, and I'll turn to the easement. Our council has obtained an ALTA survey, an updated title report from Chicago Title Insurance, and they've confirmed the easement benefits First Williamsburg parcel, dominant easement tenant, and cannot be modified absent the consent of First Williamsburg. We have, since the development of the co-op, we have had continuously used the easement to the full extent of its boundaries. In addition, First Williamsburg has continuously asserted and enforced its rights to the easement and has no intention of waiving or agreeing to any modification or termination of the easement, and will continue to enforce its rights. A servient tenant of an easement has no right to terminate the easement. Kensington School isn't even a servient tenant of the easement, as they are not the title holder to the church property, and its standing to take any action regarding title matters is suspect at best. Now, I did want to mention another statement that Commissioner Ms. Rogers mentioned, that there was a discussion of what would happen if we don't make an agreement on the easement. And I know we're just kind of speaking a little bit off the cuff, but one thing I do want to say is I do admire persistence, and I think Kensington School has been very persistent, but persistence doesn't mean that it's a good proposal. And so whether our job as the First Williamsburg Corporation and as good neighbors is to make sure that anything that we bring our intelligence to the question of, is this an enhancement to the neighborhood? And I think it is definitely not an enhancement. So my question to the commissioners is, if we are doing development, shouldn't it be something that makes a better experience, that makes something better for the future? Now, I know Mr. Morales has spoken about commitments that he has to going for the long haul, and someone spoke for him in terms of traffic. If there's traffic problems, they would talk to parents. None of this is contractual. which I understand. But that means that these are not promises that are backed up by any kind of requirement. So it could happen or it could not happen, and I think that's critical. I'm almost done. I know you're trying to move me along, and I want to give other people a chance too. I want to, let me see, is there anything else here? In terms of the church's position, the change is difficult. I think that a change toward an improvement is not so difficult. And I think that the issue here is not that it's change. I think there are quite a few people here in the neighborhood who have been here many years who have a sense of community and are really trying to contribute their time and effort to think about how can we improve this and understand that this is a dynamic community, that things are changing and developing. But I think that it's your job to be a force for improving what we have and for having vision toward the future. So I think that's pretty much covers it all. I appreciate you giving me a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Rotan. The next speaker I have up is Mark Tudor. All right, thank you. Dylan Roberts.
Hi there. Oh, sorry. I'm a voiceover actor, so my name is Dylan Roberts. I live at 3606 Central Street. I also have a child currently who is in daycare. So there's a lot that I would like to say about this. In addition to being a voiceover actor, I work in the John Hancock building. So I drive through that intersection, as one of you commissioners so pleasantly called it, a cluster. I drive through that every single day as well. And I can tell you from my drive to the Hancock building, that is the worst intersection I drive through. And I honestly believe that there is no way that this project, that this development will work currently with how that intersection is laid out. Until something is fixed about those lights, there's just no way it can work with the addition of any sort of traffic in that area. In addition, I'd like to talk about just the tuition for the school. So in the letter dated on February 8th, 2022, Kensington School states that approximately 81% of children in this area do not have a child care option should they need it. Now, that may be the case, but with their current tuition, and also based on the demographic detail report, their tuition far outpaces what HHS recommends for a family budget for tuition payments. HHS recommends 10% of your income go to childcare, and if the average household income is $160,000, that means that 10% would be $16,000 a year. And currently, Kensington exceeds that from what I have gathered from talking to my neighbors and from the little research I've been able to do on their tuition. So while it may be true that that building a new school will allow students or allow preschoolers to have a great educational experience, I don't believe this school benefits the actual neighborhood that they're building it in. It benefits the neighboring towns. It benefits some of the richer parts of Evanston. It doesn't benefit us. And to me, that's the key part of building any sort of educational environment or educational building in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Kathy Leone.
Hello, Commissioner, everyone, thank you. I'm Kathy Leone. I live at 3253 Central Street, less than 2 blocks away from Unity in Evanston, and I've lived there for almost 20 years. I also walk my dogs every day, sometimes twice a day, and go for many neighborhood walks. So I'm very, very familiar with the traffic patterns of the Central Street, Grosse Pointe Road neighborhood. So first, I can understand and relate to the folks who are experiencing big changes in their neighborhood. 4 years ago, there was a 10 single-story cottage-like rental units right next door to me. These units were unassuming, but I liked that they were well-maintained and mainly served long-term renters. The owner-developer, Schermerhorn, decided to tear those down and tear down those 10 units and get the property rezoned to build 14 two-story rental units with parking garages. Yikes. Personally, that meant there would be 7 large AC units literally 5 feet from my backyard. The property was right next to me. I was very invested in what was going on with the property, so just like this, I attended an LUC meeting to express my concerns. Because of pushback from neighbors, Schermerhorn came back with several plans and met with neighbors to discuss options. I was very active in those meetings, not because I wanted to stop the project completely, but because I knew that change, regardless of whether I wanted it or not, was going to happen. So it served me, the neighbors, Evanston, and Schermerhorn to help determine a final plan. But that's because I cared, I was invested and willing to compromise and played the part of being a good neighbor. So I've been in the same position of those that are here, and I would like to encourage neighbors to consider the big picture perspective, because that property, no matter what, is going to be sold and change is going to happen. As a local and concerned resident, I would much rather have a locally and family-owned business running a preschool doing meaningful work than a dense multi-unit rental apartment, retail, or mixed-use development. The second point I want to make is that I happened to drive by Kensington and Glenview recently, and I didn't know it was Kensington, but I remember thinking, what is that building? It is so beautiful, beautifully landscaped, well-maintained. Lo and behold, it turned out to be Kensington and Glenview. And I believe that they will continue that type of aesthetic, and I would be thrilled to have such a beautiful and well-maintained property in the area. And lastly, I am a member of Unity and started attending just a couple of years ago. As a wonderful and welcoming community with kind, open, and thoughtful people, and that all starts with at the top with Kurt Condra. I welcome you all to please join us on a Sunday service at 10:30. Shameless plug, especially any of the neighbors. So thank you.
The next speaker I have is Elisa Foster. Oh, okay. Sharon Myers.
Thank you, Commissioners, for allowing us all to have our comments. I have not been in a previous meeting, so I don't want to repeat what has been spoken, but I want to speak a bit more philosophically about why I believe what I do. My name is Sharon Myers. I live at 1123 Hull Terrace. And I believe that a school is a reflection of the health of the community because of education. Education is the future that benefits us all. I also think that Kensington is a great match for the community because it is education, because this low-rise building, which I do disagree with what has been said before, doesn't match the area. It actually does. By its design, it matches in brick, it matches in mortar, it matches in entrance. And I am a Unity member, and unfortunately it is Unity Church that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the residential area because in the 1960s it was a building so far ahead of its time. So with that match in mind, there are a few things I'd like to point out. One is that this low-rise building has a very light footprint with lasting value. Light footprint in ingress and egress and in short hours because it is not a high school, it's a preschool, it's a little kid's school, it's an early education development. And that would be very different from a condo development, all right, as has been mentioned before, or mixed housing with ingress, egress at all hours, right? So if we look at what we don't like about education, what would we like with a high-rise building with how many more parking spaces and people and partying and everything else? So let's look at what we really want in the community. Secondly is the proposed ownership. This is a man who runs a family business and has been invested in the community and in communication from the very beginning. And I do believe in, even my professional reference, that is rare for someone to be that invested, to be very patient, to be listening ever, to take action, and make changes with redraft after redraft after redraft. And lastly, as a Unity member, we have been very proud of our tradition of 60 years on the property, and yet things have changed. People no longer want to live and work so far in a church situation away from public transportation. We are also a smaller membership. We cannot stay. And so we have trusted in this process to find a new space, sell this space to someone who we do believe in our best heart of hearts represents what we are looking for in spiritual mindfulness and education. And that is Kensington School in the way that we have seen, felt, understood all the way through. And with that in mind, we do believe that Kensington will be a good steward of the land and of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker I have is Kevin Yost. All right. Larry Raffle.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Larry Raffle. I live at 3509 Central Street, directly across from the proposed development. And I was hoping I wanted to try to avoid saying this, but you have to listen to where your comments are coming from. A church that is looking to sell, and a developer that's looking to build, and neighbors who are going to remain there. And what has been said previously by the neighbors is absolutely correct, and I endorse it wholeheartedly. So I want to take my time more to talk about the traffic. And like the Commissioner Halleck said, that intersection is horrible. In fact, I've been involved in a taxi accident where my taxi I was in was totaled. And that's just one. People go in all directions. They go through the red light. They don't turn left. They go straight. And it's just a nightmare at that intersection. And there's a good reason why IDOT will not allow full access on Grosse Pointe Road, because they know how bad that intersection is. Despite what you might have heard, this development will bring traffic, and the stacking will not help because cars have to only wait 1 second or 1.5 seconds at that light at Central if you're going east. So people coming east on Central, they'll go any way they can to get through that intersection. Same with people going west on Central. It is a nightmare, and we do have people, myself and the people who live there, we have dogs, we have children, we don't have a sidewalk. The fact that we were getting a new sidewalk is news to us too. So we are in the streets all the time, and it is a quiet neighborhood, and it's a safe neighborhood. But bringing this traffic into that area is absolutely a disaster, not waiting to happen several times. And I also want to mention, too, that in addition to living there, I've lived there 14 years, I've been at Evanston 32 years, I've also served on the Plan Commission, I've served on the Park Board, and so I understand the decisions that you make are just so important, and they're very thoughtful. And I want you to think about the neighbors who are going to be there, the traffic's there, the danger, and despite what they may say with the curb cuts, the easements, and the in and out access, people are going to go whichever way is the easiest for them. They do it right now, they're going to do it again, and it is just so unsafe in that area. It's a mishmash of driveways, curb cuts, directional entrances and exits to the roads. And it's just going to be a disaster. And people will cut through Central, and they will go whichever way they want. And one of the issues that I think people are going to end up doing is they're going to find if they just stay on Central Street, going east or west, it's going to be the easiest for them, as opposed to try to go in a certain direction that you're directed or to go into the parking lot. And we have signs right there in some areas that say no parking, not many, but we have no enforcement. We have no traffic cops coming by, no traffic enforcement. So people are going to do what's easiest for them. And to say, just like was mentioned previously, there's no enforcement. And people are not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to enforce something later on if it's not done right now. So again, thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Raffle. The next speaker I have is Terry Wend.
My name is Terry Wendt. I'm a professional urban planning and design consultant, have been for 40 years. I've lived in Evanston for 30 years on and off. keep coming back here after stints in Philadelphia or other Kansas City, as a matter of fact. I'm not here to talk about the traffic, although I have to say, however this property is developed, there's going to be traffic generated by it. What is currently, if we can go back to the existing site plan, what we have basically is a building and a parking lot that is vacant 6.5 days out of the week. No wonder the neighbors like it that way, because the tranquility that this existing development creates quite a sense of tranquility to the neighbors across Central and also to the Williamsburg co-ops. As I said, I'm a private consultant, and if the co-op owners or the neighbors across Central were to hire me, I would make a couple of demands of, and I'm a member of this church, I would make a couple of demands of the church. Number one, I would insist that there be a dedicated easement into this co-op development. The current situation where they share a paved area that doesn't even have curbs and consists of 40 parking spaces. I actually think there's less parking in the Kensington plan than there is now, and less impervious surface, plus a shorter building and less building coverage. The plan I would have recommended to the co-op owners is exactly the plan that you see that Kensington has offered. A dedicated easement, a private entrance. There could be pylons on both sides, or maybe a nice archway over the entrance that says, "Welcome to Williamsburg." Instead of, if I lived there, I wouldn't know how to tell my friends how to even get to my unit. Anyway, and with regard to the people across Central, if I were working for them, I would say, look, make sure that this new development has fewer headlights facing north across into my property. Well, you can see there's about 12 parking spaces facing north in this plan. There's 6 parking spaces facing north in the new plan. This has a better frontage and is a better physical neighbor from an urban design perspective than the existing layout of the church and its parking, which, by the way, is an impervious surface that is environmentally unsustainable, since it's hardly ever used except on Sunday mornings. Those are my comments. The plan is, I would say the plan meets and exceeds what the needs are of the neighbors, and if I were a consultant to them, I would tell them that plan is good for them.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt. This next name I know I am going to ruin, so I will Trayui Sharma? All right, thank you. And again, apologize if I totally ruined the pronunciation of that name. Terry Alba?
I'm Terry Alba. I live adjacent to the property at 3508 Central Street, so I'm the property directly to the west. And I don't have a lot to add to those who have been in favor of the proposal, but in our house, we are in favor of the proposal. Everything's been said very clearly, but I think it's important to know that there are other people in the neighborhood who live there that think this is a much better use of the space than a potential multi-family unit dwelling, where traffic patterns are going to increase no matter what goes there. So we do have traffic problems there, but it's somewhat irrespective of what kind of development is. We're going to have increased traffic either way. So I'm in favor, and I think it's important that you all know that.
Thank you. And Joanne Giselli?
So my name is Joanne Gazelli. I've lived in the co-op for 30 years, and I have 3 points I want to make. The first one is personal, so I kind of want you to put the other plan up, if you don't mind. The newest version. Okay, so
Just as a second, I'm going to ask, take the handheld microphone with you so you can be heard.
Okay, so this first spot there is my parking place, okay? And that is a white plank wall allowing maybe 9 to 12 feet for me to back out. My car's 15 feet long. I'm just wondering, in the winter, when it snows, and how is a plow going to ever help us get out of there, get out of these parking places? That's one thing. Secondly, I live right here. My back porch faces not yours, the school's garbage dump, or whatever you want to call it. I know it's got a white fence around it. I saw your other schools. I'm just saying these are small things, but they are meaningful to the people in the co-op, okay? So I think that when you're asking for special use, and you have all these variances, his variance makes his garbage dump 6 or 4 feet closer to my back porch. Just saying. I want to put it on a personal level for you guys, so maybe you can relate to us better. Secondly, I think all easements are created by necessity. This one happens to protect all of our utilities. So for that disruption, I feel like, I don't know, it's a huge deal to us. And secondly, the ingress egress and the way it affects the neighborhood and us. I'm not sure if there is a solution, so I don't know how to be of help. Lastly, the traffic situation. I did my own traffic study when this all came up last summer. I emailed you guys a long email with objections and things about it. I don't know, the unity statement is false because the two closest daycare nursery schools, the Goddard School and the Barbaro School, both have huge traffic problems. Culver is a mess, and Grosse Pointe Road, the cars are lined up in front of the hospital entrance a couple times a day. So you guys hopefully are driving around, you can see this stuff happening. Okay, so for my own traffic study, I sat, can I have that microphone again? Right here. I sat right here, okay? And I counted cars from 6:30. Oh, sorry.
We just need to make sure that you're picked up on the microphone. Yeah, that's fine.
I counted cars personally sitting there. So northbound, between 6:30 and 9:30, we had 1,286 cars, 2 motorcycles, 9 buses, and 1 garbage truck. Southbound, we had 1,142 cars, 12 buses, 2 garbage trucks, and 2 motorcycles. I'm just saying, it's anecdotal, but that other traffic study is inaccurate. Okay, and if you drive up Central and you make a left, you'll see how those cars are flying and how they have to slow down for people that are going to turn into the Kensington lot. Okay, lastly, I know he's done 3 iterations, but maybe you have to let it go after a while because he's not willing to make it smaller. Nobody has an objection to a smaller school on that corner, and a lot of us think a school is not a bad option. Okay?
All right, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, please.
I'm done.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening.
The next speakers will be given 2 minutes, and I will begin with John Lindener.
Hi, good evening. My name is John Linder. I live actually right around the corner, so I'm a 6th Ward resident. So I'm here tonight I brought my son, drug him along so he could see some civic duties actually happening. It's the first time I've done this. But I thought it was important for him to see me speak up for something, because I think it's a lot easier sometimes to speak just up against something. I get it, change is hard and change is difficult. I believe Kensington School is a positive addition to my ward. I've been there for 20 years and hope to be there for another 20 years at 3214 Thayer Street. Kensington's got a long history in investing in the communities, staying in the communities, working with the communities. They're not a developer who buys, develops, and then moves on. We've seen, Barbara was just mentioned, Northminster. We've raised our kids here they've worked out the issues, and I believe Kensington will do that as well. Those schools have a positive impact on housing, quality of life for families, and the future of our kids. Kensington's mission is a family-owned business, so that fits well. And Kensington has shown amazing grit and perseverance, and we are lucky to have somebody who wants to be in Evanston. As a resident of Evanston, I know that we can be vociferous sometimes in Evanston. Unfortunately, I find that when it comes to change, the voices usually are out against something. And I just wanted to say that moving beyond the status quo, I think, is really important. The committee, you all have such a daunting task of balancing the quality of life as well as the fiscal responsibility of our city. It's really quite incredible. I urge the committee not to be swayed by emotional appeals and unfounded worries. The city just announced hiring consultants for $3 million to bring in business, and we have a business who wants to come into Evanston. So I hope that we can find a way to do that and find a way to make this work. Thank you.
The next speaker I have signed up is Gloria Wagner.
I'm going to yield back my time.
All right, thank you. Mark Montana is passing as well. Laverne Johns. All right. And I think that's everybody on my list. Is there anybody who signed up who didn't get to speak? Oh, I'm sorry, I did skip you. Yes, you are on my list. Got too many little notations here.
No problem. My name is Catherine Mathis. I have lived in the 6th Ward at 2758 Lawndale for 29 years, and I want to echo many of the things that John said. I absolutely support this development. The thing for me, two main things. First is the church has been a part of the community, and the church is building community and empowering people for our community. And so the school feels like a perfect next generation for that kind of an activity in the city versus a high-density residential development or retail or mixed use, something like that. The school is a continuation of that development for our community. And we've heard from this evening that Kensington has similar values to what Unity has done in the city. They have a track record of attractive and well-maintained properties around the area. They're attractive to young families, and we know that the preschools are something needed in the area. The metrics confirm that the traffic is manageable and that the school could even be a catalyst to improving property values in the area. The second thing that I think is very important is I think Chuck Marlis has demonstrated his desire to be a part of this community, of the Evanston community, through his patience and persistence and diligence in going through this process. That is the kind of person that I would like to have as part of our business community and our community at large. So I request to approve this project. Thank you.
With that, I have gone through the list of people who have signed up to speak. And I will ask Mr. Marlis if he would like to come up, if you'd like to say anything in response to those comments, if there's anything that was raised that you would like to address. Or you can just give us a final summation as well.
Yeah, no, I really couldn't add anything else that we've already spoken to before. We all know that there's a traffic issue at that intersection, but I think someone wisely did say that, something will be going on in this new location, be it residential or mixed use or a Kensington school, that will impact traffic at that site. We hope to be as mindful, and I think we've been very thoughtful about how we've gone about addressing our plans and addressing our neighbors and addressing the community. Just for everyone's edification, we will be a member of this community for a long time should we be so lucky to be at the site. Like I mentioned before, we're a 54-year-old family business. If fortunate enough to be here, we won't be going away anytime soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marlis. At this point, we will close the public testimony, and the board will go into deliberation. And so I'll ask for general thoughts from commissioners. You have to start, Commissioner Halleck.
Okay. Several things to say. One of them is I personally don't think the variations that they're asking for are that significant. We've approved more significant variations in the past. There's been a lot of discussion about my comments last time about the and today too about the traffic in that area. I think the problem is not increased or decreased by this development. I think the problem is in the way the lights work there. This is beyond our scope, beyond this project scope. But I do think that is very critical, and I think IDOT or the city or the state, whoever is responsible for these roads, really needs to look at this this intersection because it is a cluster. As far as the this development, I think that some of the people have spoke about this that there are other developments, multifamily, retail. Think about that. Think about the traffic issues that would be caused by those other potential developments. I don't think this development adds to the situation or makes the situation worse. I think another thing to think about is that if you did have a different development of housing or retail, you would have multiple entities to deal with. In this case, it's one manager. If there's a problem, you can go to one manager, and he or she controls that whole site. I think that's a big plus, and the neighbors should be comforted by that. Let's see, what else can I say here? The character of the neighborhood. This is a little bit of a tough one because, I heard the neighborhood speak about the character of the neighborhood from their side of it, which is the west. But as I look at this neighborhood, this site, it's actually on Grosse Pointe Road. That is not a neighborhood street. That is a major street in Evanston. And I think a function like this proposed daycare center is appropriate for that street. It's a commercial development. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Halleck. I mean, we can go down the row, or if somebody wants to go next,
We'll go down the road. So first of all, I understand the facility may not benefit the neighborhood itself on an immediate basis, but there are some real public benefits that come through with it. It does put a property backs on the tax roll, which is important, and I think it offers a needed service. I'm a little disappointed in the architecture in that I don't think that's really the place for a colonial look. I think it would have been interesting to see what you could have done with a more modern, contemporary approach. But mostly, I think some of the problems and the perception of the problems is due to the size of the building, which once more just seems a little too much for the site. But having said that, I think this could be a very positive addition to the community and to Evanston as a whole. I'd like to be able to support it. My concern, as usual, is the traffic, and I agree with Commissioner Halleck, no matter what goes there, there'll be problems with traffic. But I went to this site 3 times over the last 2 days, and it is quiet on that leg of Central Street until you get up to the intersection, and then it's like all hell breaks loose, and the gates of Mordor open, and all kinds of things are coming at you. So one of my concerns, or one of my recommendations to the city would be to include something in the condition where the applicant really is controlling that parking lot and controlling the flow of traffic in and out as much as possible. And that may mean that be monitored by the city as well with the neighborhood, that feedback from the neighbors do get to the city and get to the facility as well, because that is a very, very quiet street, and as someone remarked, there are no sidewalks. And that is not a place where you want to have more accidents and more cars backing up into the neighborhood. So I'd like to see what we can do there to improve that. I think some more work needs to be done on the traffic.
Commissioner Lindvall?
Yes, I think that this iteration is better than the last. Obviously, practically, this project cannot go forward as is without the ultimate agreement on a relocated easement. So, and I hope that can be worked out between, I guess, the church and the applicant and the co-op. I would note that, this proposed easement in some respects is better than the 16-foot easement that exists now, that if considering putting in like cones or a curb or something on that 16 feet and reserving that for the co-op. In this case, there's a 20-foot drive, two-way drive. So I think that is something that would be more positive for the co-op, and frankly, that's so the drive width on the north-south leg is 4 feet wider, which I think is positive. The easement that is immediately adjacent to the co-op's parking spaces doesn't change. So I think that this plan is, I'm supportive of this land use in this location and, in the current site design. But, again, our opinion isn't going to make much difference, because ultimately the private parties need to agree. I think that my concern is this probably ought not to go to the city council until there is some sort of an easement agreement, but that's just my thought.
I'm next. I think the applicant has done a lot of work and has acted in very good faith to create the best solution possible for a school at this site. However, I remain very concerned that it's just not the right site for something like this. Whether it's a school or whether it's other kinds of planned development, commercial, residential, yes, anything would add traffic, but that doesn't mean that necessarily that any of those things are a good addition to this site. I don't have much experience driving through this intersection, but I have biked through it, and despite that act of bravery, I do think it's challenging, and I feel swayed by public's comments about the challenge of that intersection, and it seems just looking at it, it seems like not the best idea to put more curb cuts and more traffic so close to an already problematic intersection, which we already understand. So I remain very concerned about that. And I would also just like to point out that I'm hearing almost overwhelming public opposition to the project, and I know we've heard some testimony from the public that is in support of it, but it seems to me that the majority of that testimony are all people that have an interest in the sale of the property. So I think we have to take that into account, and I feel it would almost be irresponsible for us to be adding a safety problem to an already problematic intersection.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mironchev?
So I will start with this. I believe the idea of putting school and daycare is not bad, actually. It's it's a good spot and it probably will serve nicely the community. Kensington is a good name in this business. I would say this is a good buyer. The things that I don't like is, and that's why I asked the questions about the capacity of the school. I think that once again we have a project that is bigger in program than what this site can take. It's simply larger than what this site can take. If this building is smaller capacity, it will resolve many of the problems, including parking, drop-offs, movement of people, cars, trucks, garbage, and all these things will become easily solvable. So this is my main concern. Once again, we have a project that is bigger than what the site can take. And I will support some of my colleagues. The building seems overwhelming. It may be lower than the church, but the church has its peak and other things. This building is massive. And on the other hand, just simply architecture, why don't make something for children? This seems something that is colonial style for a civic center or something like that. Make something for the children that is attractive for the children. So these are my two main concerns. And frankly, I don't think this project is ready to go to council. I think it needs to be reworked. Thank you.
And Commissioner Hugo.
I just have just a technical question. Obviously, the easement is critical here. With no easement, no project under any scenario. So if, for example, we were to move forward with this, and one of the conditions is that an easement agreement be entered into, how much time do the parties have to enter into the agreement? Is there a sunset period, and if they don't reach agreement within 6 months, it comes back to us, or the project is dead? Does it go on for years? What would happen if this were to move forward and no easement agreement is there a time period? No easement agreement is agreed to, there's going to be no project, obviously.
I think that the Land Use Commission could set that time period. But I think if you set that time period, then, if one party doesn't want to agree, they know they just have to wait it out that length of period. So, I think that's up to the commission if they want to set that time period. But I think ultimately, if this is approved, but then the easement can't be agreed to, then the project would have to come back for a different reiteration. So that is a condition that can be placed, but the timing could either be left in or not. I think if staff can speak to it, the approvals last for a certain period of time as well.
Yes. Mr. Griffith, would you like to give us the standard for the special use?
Well, I was going to comment that the staff is recommending that the easement be both noted on the plan prior going to City Council, and that a special use in terms of a plan development being approved does have a time limit. So if it is approved, there is a clock that ticks for them to obtain a building permit.
We have several clocks that tick.
Yeah.
Because we have a 90-day window from any time that we make a recommendation for City Council to act on something, and then a special use, I believe it's a year, is a year. I'm getting shaking heads from staff, so that once a special use is granted, there's a 1-year window to begin construction of the project. So obviously there are some built-in timeframes already without us doing anything. Those are just encoded in the code.
The second question I have traffic is obviously a big issue. I live a little further east on Central, and that intersection is, I'd probably use a stronger word even than Commissioner Halleck has used. But one of the conditions staff is recommending is that if it becomes a problem traffic, that then the owner engage with IDOT and work on the lighting, the traffic signaling, et cetera, to try to alleviate some of the issues. what if IDOT doesn't play ball? What if that were not to happen? What happens then as a practical matter? The project's going forward, it's being built, the school's there, and all of a sudden traffic's a problem. Is that condition a realistic condition? And what can be done to strengthen the resolution of some of these traffic issues, particularly with respect to the traffic lights and all that, which are, I quite can't, after years of living here, I can't quite figure out how that's all
So,
mystery to me, how who comes up with that scheme, but.
so with IDOT being a separate governmental agency over which we have no control, nor does the city have any control, there's no way that we can make them play ball, as you put it, on anything. So there really is no true
No teeth in that
enforcement
condition. Yeah.
of such a type of recommendation. I mean, it could be put in, but there's absolutely no enforcement of it because we don't have the mechanisms to enforce it, especially since is Grosse Pointe the highway road that's causing the IDOT thing, or both of these?
It's Grosse Pointe Road.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
And to clarify, the recommendation is that if there is a traffic issue along or on Central, that the applicant engages in a study with an IDOT qualified or approved consultant to study the timing, and then also restricting access onto Central during off-peak hours. So that's something the city could control,
Right.
is restricting vehicles exiting onto Central to the off-peak hours to try and address that as well.
Because I personally like to see conditions now at this point, prior to getting the building permit or whatever, that we try to maximize the ability to lessen the traffic impact that's anticipated from this project, and not leave it sort of post when the train's left the station and there's nothing we can do about it. So my specialty is not IDOT procedures and how to do it, but if there's a way we could put a condition in, so we move forward on this, that would force a pre-building permit resolution to the maximum extent possible of traffic issues with IDOT or the city or whoever is in a position to do that, I'd certainly be in favor of
Can I
that,
say
because
something?
traffic seems to be a huge concern.
Can I say something? I
Yeah.
don't think you can control IDOT. You can just hope for the
No,
best.
I understand that.
But I'm thinking that maybe the applicant can control the flow out into these areas by having someone stay. That's why I asked about someone stationed to help with drop-offs. But they also could possibly control the flow out into the street if there's all of a sudden a lot of cars that want to go out, and they'll know this, I think, after a few days of how, or weeks certainly, of how people are coming to the site. But that's what I would suggest, that if there is a flow on to Grosse Pointe or Central issue, that the applicant can control that, or at least a question.
Fair enough, and then we could, if we were to put that in there, then you're really relying on the applicant and the enforcement and all that. But I appreciate there's a reality here. The IDOT is independent. There's no way to predict or control what they do. Having said all that, I do think that, from the neighborhood's perspective, if you want the tranquility you currently have now, you're really limited to having the city buy this and turn it into a park. Anything else we put there, and I think you do want development there, you do want something there, is going to result in increased traffic and is going to result in some sort of building that's different from the church that's there. And of the various options that are out there, I think that a daycare center, a school, is certainly better than some of the other options that are there, particularly since you're really talking about a limited window during the day when the traffic is going to be there. It's not 24 hours. It's during the weekdays, and again, in limited hours with drips and drabs and 10-minute intervals, 5, 6 cars even at a max. Doesn't strike me as huge. So I think as a matter of principle, I'm in favor of having something like this school there. The architecture, I mean, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. I looked at it and I thought, this is kind of cool, and it looks great. And building something that the kids are going to like. I think it's really for the owner the operator to figure out what sort of building is going to be aesthetically pleasing, in my view at least, to the people who are paying for that service and the kind of building they want to send their kids to. So again, I didn't find the architecture terribly. I found it actually quite nice. Certainly, if you compare it to the, no offense to the Unity Church, but I certainly, for my aesthetics, find that a much more attractive building than what's currently there, even though I realize it was way before its time when it was put up there in the 60s. So I think for some of the factors that Commissioner Halleck has indicated, and he and I seem to be agreeing quite a bit lately, there's no pre-arranged agreement between us, but I would support this. But I would not want it to go to the City Council until this easement issue is resolved, and we've done everything possible to try to deal with anticipated traffic issues, because there will be obviously an increase in traffic because cars will be coming. So I'm in favor, but before it goes to City Council, I think we need to have the easement issue resolved. And perhaps I could ask one last question, or perhaps you don't have a view on this. How solid is the current co-op easement situation? Is it rock solid? Do they really have this veto right over this property if they were not to agree to a new easement?
Unfortunately, I haven't reviewed the easement language that is recorded and available to the co-op, so I can't really weigh in. I think, there is an easement by necessity, but it ultimately would be up to a court to interpret if it goes that far.
And then finally, on the kids walking on the street and all that, I think is an issue. And how much sidewalk is being put in now? How much along Central? Is it just along? Does the sidewalk sort of end where the last curb cut is on the west side of Central there? How far will that sidewalk go along Central?
Currently, the sidewalk ends on the east side of the church's driveway, and so the applicant will be required to extend the sidewalk all the way to their west property line.
Okay, but certainly where cars are coming and going and entering, that there will be a sidewalk there for
So basically on the
people,
site plan,
strollers and the kids and the dogs could walk on a sidewalk.
So basically what you're seeing there is the sidewalk that's fronting the building, and then to the west, that's new sidewalk that doesn't currently exist.
So somewhat does alleviate the concern that you've got people walking in the street. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I have a kind of a clarification I'd like to get from staff with respect to the conditions that they're suggesting for this matter. And the first one has to do with the applicant entering into an easement agreement, prior to the issuance of a building permit. But then there's a sentence that goes, the applicant should also revise the plan showing the easement before this application proceeds to the city's Planning and Development Committee. Doesn't that drawing show the easement? Or is there something else that I'm missing that you're trying to address?
The site plan doesn't actually label it as an easement. It's simply a hashed area that's not labeled.
I thought it was labeled as an easement on the drawing that I saw.
I'm not seeing, maybe it is. I'm not seeing it.
It does say 26-foot easement.
It should clarify that it's an access or an ingress-egress easement, just to clarify.
Oh, okay. So it's really a clarification of the easement labeling is what you're suggesting. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. We've gone through everybody. It's now my turn.
Can I make one quick point?
The record is closed at this point. I can't take
Just
comments.
to respond to Commissioner Herco about the easement and the letter.
I cannot take any comments at this point. The record is closed. My general feelings on this project, I like the project. I think it's a smart use of redeveloping an area. Obviously, the church has decided for whatever reason to move on, And so this property does need to be redeveloped at some point. I don't know that there's a new church that's looking to buy a church property. So it will be redeveloped in some way, shape, or form at some point. In terms of architecture, I personally like the building. I think it looks academic, but that's neither here nor there. We all have our own personal tastes on what buildings should look like. And I think asking preschoolers to help guide building design, while an interesting project, would not result any of the ideas that would meet any of our standards. So I would have to explain to 5-year-olds how land use works. With that all being said, the one issue I really have is the traffic flow on this property. It really creates problems. It's a bad intersection. It will have to be redeveloped at some point, and there will have to be a traffic plan that works when that development occurs. I do like the idea, and it's not really our purview over easements. It's not something that we're involved in. That's a legal agreement between two parties, of which the city is not one. I personally like moving the one driveway all the way to the west. I'm all in favor of trying to get as many entrances and exits away from that intersection as far as we can. And so that's the one entrance that I really have the problem with is that easternmost one on Central, and getting people into that more so than getting people out of it, and what's going to happen there. I'll kind of reserve the rest of my comments because I do have to go through the standards, and so as I go through those standards, I'll be making comments as well. But does anybody have anything else to add before I go through the standards? Commissioner Westerberg.
Just one comment. The Latin School in Chicago is obviously a very large facility in a very intense and rich residential area. But one of the things they've done is literally hire off-duty policemen to help monitor the traffic, control it as it releases, as it comes into the neighborhood and releases it. It seems to me that not necessarily hiring off-duty policemen, but really dedicating staff and making sure that the neighbors know who those staff members are would be something that we could add to the conditions. I think it would be helpful.
All right. Which ones did we bring up first? Special use. In order to make a recommendation for approval, and we are a recommending body on this particular matter, there are several standards of approval that we must find are met. If we feel something is not met, we can create a condition in such a way to make it met, with that standard being, or with that recommendation being included in the conditions that we send forth to City Council. But I'll go ahead and start with these. The first one is that as one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance, we do have, oddly, this is an R2 district, which goes to show how screwed up some of our zoning is, because this is a lot that would be developed basically for a 2-flat, which would not be something you would place right along some of our commercial roads. So I'll just make that comment to the people who did the plan in 1993. But we do find that a school and a daycare for children is one of the approved uses within the R2 district. Number 2, it is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. Obviously, one of the things that the comprehensive plan does look at is the redevelopment of lots. Not everything we have in the city will last forever. Things change over time. I mean, when our last zoning code was written, there was not half the technology that we have today. So things are constantly adapting, and so we see adaptive reuse. We have a school, or we have a church here that has reached the end of its time, and something new needs to take that place, which is what our comprehensive plan allows for. Also, one of the things that was mentioned was putting the property back on the tax rolls, something that obviously we are always looking to do in order to help generate additional tax income for the city of Evanston. Number 3, it will not cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. One of the things that we have to look at here is kind of weighing what we anticipate the impact to be on the neighborhood, which is something that we always kind of have to make a best guess at. In my opinion, it will have an impact on the neighborhood. All development does. I don't believe that it will be horribly detrimental to the neighborhood to have a school being used in this particular location. The impact will be greater than a church currently is, but it also will not be as great as many other things that would be placed in this type of a location. As I mentioned, this is an R2 district, but it's really a commercial and business area and should not be zoned R2 in my particular opinion. Number 4, it does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. This is something we've had a little bit of testimony about. My personal feelings on it are obviously having something that is in use in the neighborhood increases values as opposed to having a derelict building. I don't know what the plans are with Unity in terms of at what point they would vacate the property and kind of leave it sitting, or what their long-term plan is. But my feelings are that the addition of a functioning, thriving business in the neighborhood would help property values. Number 5, it can be adequately served by public facilities and services. We have no reason to believe that this wouldn't be. We've heard some discussion about easements of sewage and water. That's really kind of relocating things as opposed to providing new service. So I believe that standard has been met. Number 6, it does not cause undue traffic congestion. I think this is the one that we've probably heard a lot of testimony on. In my opinion, as I've mentioned before, there will be traffic increases in this neighborhood by any use that is put there. I personally am not satisfied with the traffic flow in and out of the place, out of the property as it's current delineated. I don't know what can be done to improve that. We've had discussion about IDOT. We all know that we have no control over IDOT. There's been discussion about hiring people to sort of get people in and out. I can understand that, but what do you do when that car is turning across Central trying to come in the wrong way? You don't have somebody run out and stop them by throwing their body in front of a car, which just causes more problems for traffic. So this standard I don't believe is met, but I do know that some of my colleagues feel that this standard is met, and we will go through that as we move along here. Number 7, it preserves significant.
Can I just say something? I don't think that this site is causing undue traffic congestion, just to be clear. The entire intersection, yes, is a problem, but I don't think that it, meaning this site, by itself causes undue traffic.
All right, thank you. It preserves significant historical and architectural resources. We've not heard any testimony. Obviously, the fact that we're looking at taking down a building that's been there for 60 years, somewhere in that neighborhood, but that building does not have, to my knowledge, any specific designation of a historically significant building, and therefore that standard is met. Number 8, it preserves significant natural and environmental features. This was one of the things we didn't really talk about, but there has been discussion about removing trees, replanting trees, redeveloping basically the whole landscaping scheme. The city does have a tree preservation ordinance that obviously the applicant would have to comply with, and they would have to justify the removal of any mature trees. And specifically why they would have to be come down, and usually there is a replacement in kind for any tree that comes down. So that one I feel is met because of the tree preservation ordinance. And number 9, it complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances, except to the extent such regulations have been modified through the plan development or the process or the grant of a variation. And looking at just some of the other areas of what types of development allowances are being requested, these are things that we typically grant. I don't see any reason to believe that there would be any regulations that would be not enforced, because we are changing a number of the issues through the actual plan development process and the special use process to include those areas where they are not in compliance by right. I'll ask if everyone is in agreement with my standards. Knowing people are not, I would ask them to identify which standards they feel are met or are not met in opposition to what I've gone through. Commissioner Huco.
I would argue that the traffic one would be met if we were to put in whatever conditions we can put in, given the reality, whether it be whatever. I think with putting in the most conditions we can that are actually doable, I think we would, that standard would be met.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Lindwall, did you?
Well, I was just going to agree and agreeing with Commissioner Halleck, who said, the traffic congestion really is there now with respect to the more general area. So I don't think this particular use proposed use would cause undue traffic congestion in and of itself.
All right. Anyone else want to weigh in? Commissioner Westerberg?
I don't think the use causes the congestion, but the scale, perhaps the scale of the use begins to put an undue burden with that traffic congestion. And that's why it's, this is hard. We keep talking about what conditions we could layer in to resolve this, but the impact on the neighbors is going to be directly related to the size of the school and the number of visits and the drop-offs and the pickups. And there's where it gets a little troubling. I don't know if we can't put conditions in. I don't think then that we've been able to meet that standard.
All right.
I'll disagree with number 2. I think that increasing risk to public safety is in conflict with the comprehensive general plan.
All right. I'm not hearing anything else. We do have also a separate set of standards and guidelines for planned developments in the R2 district. Do you have those brought up? Okay. Number 1, the requested site development allowances will not have a substantial adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, and property values of adjoining properties. In this particular case, we are looking at several different things that are being needed. The impervious surface lot coverage of 60.5 where 55 is permitted, the detached accessory use of the refuse enclosure located in the front yard, the off-street parking located within the front yard, off-street parking located within an interior yard, the reduction of 2-lane driveway from 24 to 17 feet. Where is that driveway that we're talking about?
Specifically, the driveway that's along or adjacent to the co-op parking spaces.
Okay,
So it's
so
not,
that-
it's not the north-south section, it's the north-east, south.
Well,
But that's
It's
the one
north-
that,
it's the
that's
park-
the one that
it's-
Public
it's the
Works
whole-
said was fine.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify which one that was. Reduce the required transition landscape strip along the west rear property line from 10 to 5.6 feet, and eliminate the required 10-foot transition landscape strip along the south interior side property. So those are the particular areas that we're looking at. And I would say that this standard is met, and looking at some of these, a number of the things are based upon the uniqueness of the property. It's a triangle-shaped property. There aren't really true yards in the way that we traditionally think of a front yard and a side yard and a rear yard because of the odd shape of the property. So I believe that standard is met.
Yeah, may I also say that while the impervious surface lot coverage is higher than the development allowance, it's less than exists at present, so there is a reduction.
Right. Number 2, the proposed development is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. This is where we've had a little bit of testimony about how does it fit into things to the west, to the east, to the south. And this is why I think this property was probably zoned R2 many, many years ago, was because they felt it kind of tied into those sorts of things. However, in looking at the type of building that's being built and what it is being used for, it doesn't feel particularly out of scale. It doesn't feel like it's particularly out of place in this particular neighborhood. And we do see schools like this in residential districts all the time. So actually by having it in a residential district that is actually more business commercial, I think it actually is a better situation than otherwise it could be. Number 3, the development site circulation is designed in a safe and logical manner to mitigate potential hazards for pedestrians and vehicles at the site and in the immediate surrounding area. This particular standard, again, is one that I'm kind of hung up on. I know some of my fellow commissioners have mentioned, that this particular use in this particular site isn't in and of itself causing undue traffic congestion or potential hazards. I believe that when you're placing it next to an already hazardous intersection, it compounds those. And so I believe standard 3 is not met on that particular location, although I'm sure commissioners disagree with me. Number 4, the proposed development aligns with the current and future climate and sustainability goals of the city. We've not really had testimony to this, but the fact that we are seeing a reduction in impervious surface, even though we are still over, and the fact that we are trying to save trees, the fact that we are trying to create green space as much as we can, and the fact that any development here, they would still be under LEED certification under our building guidelines. So that is something that they would still be having to meet. So I believe that standard is met. Number 5, the public benefits that are appropriate to the surrounding neighborhood and the city as a whole will be derived from the approval of the requested site development. Obviously, this is something that's a little bit different from plan development to plan development. When we're looking at a plan development that is a school providing daycare, that's obviously has a public benefit in and of itself. The fact that we also would be seeing improvements to the property, which hopefully would also include the public sidewalks being improved, widened, so people are not forced to walk in the street around this very dangerous area. Those are things that we would expect to see here. And again, the public benefits is something we kind of recommend out to City Council, but City Council really gets to decide what the public benefits are.
Excuse me, can I ask the chair a question about number 3? Is there a plan in terms of site circulation and access that you think would solve that, would make that acceptable?
There is. It creates a nightmare for people coming to the site. I think a right in, right out on both. I think cutting left across traffic creates a problem.
Where is it cutting left across traffic?
It's on Central Street.
On Central.
Left in.
Left in.
But there's almost
coming
no
in.
traffic.
But there's no
on
traffic.
Central.
There's no traffic on Central. I mean, it's if you go there now, there is literally, and I drive this every day, twice a day. There is no cars on Central, none.
Okay.
And I'm doing this during peak times. It's just I'm asking you. You're saying, well, no, this doesn't work. Well, what does work in your opinion? And I think, and the reason why I'm saying this is because I think that the applicant, I was not happy with the other plan,
right,
the previous plan. But I think that what they've done to this plan is probably the best situation that they can have, given all the issues, including the neighborhood that doesn't want cars going west. So, to me, when you say that it doesn't meet the standards, it's like, well, what does?
And I would counter that it's not really my job to come up with what does. That is the job of the applicant.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that just to be flippant. I mean, we look at projects as they are proposed to us. And I've sat on this commission for a short period of time because we've only been organized, but I've sat on these commissions for a long time, and I've seen people try to redevelop and redesign entire projects. And that's not something that, in my opinion, this board or this commission should be doing. The applicant is charged with presenting us with their best plan, and then we decide whether or not we feel it meets the standards. Any other comments? Again, going through those, I know there were some people who would disagree with me on number 3.
Yeah, I think I'm one of them, because I think that allowing the left turn from Central onto the site is much better than one of the potential alternatives is people, coming up, was it Princeton or Greeley, and so they can make a right turn into the site as you're proposing, and I think that creates much more traffic through the neighborhood than allowing the left turn. So I think that the current solution, or the current proposal, is better than right in, right out.
All right. Are there any other, we have to go through this specific section? I'm asking staff. Do I have to go through the specific to section 68110? And if I do, how do I stop having to do that? Because these aren't really standards. These are just ideas.
I'm comfortable if you do not want to go through those standards.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll just note that for the record, there are some specific things that deal with general planning ideas, but they aren't really standards that we can find are met or are not met. They just ask us to keep in mind certain things about land use intensity, housing preservation, environmental, traffic impact, and parking, but a lot of those things are covered in the standards that we do go through. So we've gone through the standards. There are some conditions, recommendations that city staff has put together, which are on page 15 of the staff memo, which are the applicant and co-op enter into an easement agreement, providing access. My personal feelings, again, are that we really should not be weighing in on an easement in any way, shape, or form. That is a legal agreement between two parties, and we are not one of the parties. When I say we, I mean the city. So that's something that really needs to be coordinated between the applicant, the current property owner, and the party that has the easement, which is First Williamsburg. So that's not something I feel comfortable with us even weighing into in terms of conditions.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to that. I think, right, it's not our business to get into the negotiations. It's an agreement between two people, but we are setting the condition. If we were to set a condition that the easement agreement be agreed, we can indicate by which time it should. Right now, it's by issuance of the building permit, and we could accelerate to say before it goes to City Council. Because we're already asking that the plan showing the easement go to the Planning and Development Committee. So, yes, you're right, it's a private thing, but I do feel we are in a position to, if we're going to have that as a condition, by when it should be completed, I think.
Attorney Ruggie?
Chair Rogers, it's my understanding that in order to obtain a building permit, they would have to have an easement agreement anyway. So it will be a requirement for the building permit. So if the city is just requiring it prior to getting the building permit, then that will already be required.
Okay. Does that help satisfy you, Commissioner Hugo? Number 2, provide a permit from IDOT for any work with the Grosse Pointe Road right-of-way. I'm fine with that. Provide a revised photometric plan showing light levels measured to the property line. A maximum of 0 lumens is permitted at the property line. We've not really heard any testimony on this. Is this a standard? This is a thing that we do with parking lots? I think it is.
It's a standard in the code, and the photometric plan does have light measurements, but it's not to the property line. So
Okay.
it just needs to clarify that.
All right, so that's just a clarification. All right. Number 4, as operations begin, if traffic added by the daycare center becomes an issue on Central Street, the right out only turn on Central Street will be restricted to outside peak traffic hours. If this is unsuccessful in resolving traffic issues, the owner will be required to engage an IDOT pre-qualified SCAT consultant to complete an analysis to retime the traffic signals. Again, we've had a little bit of testimony, or I guess not testimony, but discussion among ourselves about we really can't do much with IDOT. We can ask for a study, but I don't know that we can really require much beyond that.
This is a consultant.
Yeah.
This is a consultant, not IDOT itself.
Right.
This is IDOT, so that's doable.
Right. I'm fine leaving that one in. Again, the city does have the ability to control the access points and things like that, so that's fine. Staff are not allowed to park in the neighborhood. That's something that we traditionally put in with any sort of a special use. Comply with the tree preservation ordinance, City Code Section 788, which kind of addresses a number of the landscaping issues. Coordinate maintenance of existing trees along the west property line with the property to the west. Make reasonable efforts to hire local contractors to do work to construct the child care center, and make reasonable efforts to hire Evanston residents to work at the child care center. Are there other conditions that people would like to see added into any recommendation? Commissioner Lindwall?
Just have a clarification. I think that it's important, even though the applicant would be required to have the easement prior to the building permit, I think we should keep number one.
I disagree greatly, because I don't think we have any business putting ourselves into agreements between other parties.
I think my point is, I think we just have to recognize that that is something that will be required prior to issuing a building permit.
And I think everybody's aware of that. I don't know that our condition adds anything to that. It's already a requirement for any building permit would have to represent any easements on the property. Anyone else?
I don't know whether it makes sense to add a condition again about monitoring that parking lot. So I'd be curious to hear from some of the other commissioners on that. It is something probably the applicant would do if this is approved in any event, because it simply makes sense. If the city, however, cannot enforce it, then I don't know if it makes sense to add it. However, I do think it is helpful for the neighbors to know what they can expect if this goes through.
I think it should be added. I made that point also. I think that this is something that, again, single management of the site, this is something that they want to do. They want to make they live in the neighborhood, they want to make the neighborhood happy. This is something that probably would do. But to encourage it, or to say what side of this we're on, I think we should keep it in.
So how would you clarify such a condition? I just want the wording so we can all kind of agree that what does management of the parking lot mean?
The applicant shall monitor the traffic in and out of the parking lot and
We could say the applicant shall monitor and control the flow of traffic within the parking lot and out onto Central Street during peak use hours.
All right, that's fine. Yeah, I just so we have some more wording as to exactly what we mean by management of the parking lot. Anything else? Any other conditions anybody feels should not be included? If not, I will ask if there is a motion for a recommendation to City Council for 3434 Central Street, 22 PLND 0012. All right, Commissioner Westerberg is putting papers together. Okay, Commissioner Lindwall.
It's been a while. I move approval of.
Recommendation.
I move that we make a positive recommendation to approve Plan Development 22 PLND-0012, 3434 Central Street, Kensington School, to the forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the requested special use, plan development, and site development allowances, subject to the following conditions. One, that the applicant shall monitor and control the flow of traffic in and out of the parking lot during peak periods. Two, provide a permit from IDOT for any work within the Grosse Pointe Road right-of-way. Three, provide a revised photometric plan showing light levels measured to the property line. A maximum of 0 lumens is permitted at the property line. 4, after operations begin, if traffic added by the daycare center becomes an issue on Central Street, the right out only turn onto Central Street will be restricted to outside peak traffic hours. If this is unsuccessful in resolving traffic issues, the owner will be required to engage an IDOT pre-qualified SCAT consultant to complete an analysis to retime the traffic signals. 5, staff are not allowed to park in the neighborhood. 6, comply with the tree preservation ordinance, City Code Section 7-8-8. 7, coordinate maintenance of existing trees along the west property line with the property to the west. 8, make reasonable efforts to hire local contractors to do work to construct this child care center. And 9, make reasonable efforts to hire Evanston residents to work at this child care center. Is that?
That's fine. It's been moved by Commissioner Lindwall. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Halleck. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Halleck? Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Lindwall?
Yes.
Commissioner Miranchev?
No.
Commissioner Pucktell?
No.
Commissioner Westerberg?
No.
Chair Rogers?
No. So by a vote of 3 to 4, the motion does not pass. The way it works is it will still move on to City Council. They will just have a recommendation from this body that we do not feel that the standards have been met. And they will then be able to make any determination that they need. They can either support our decision, override our decision. They can totally look at it brand
Can I ask a question about that? And I could have dreamt this, or I could have read it, that when there is a, either a tie vote or not a recommendation, positive recommendation of the council, they don't get our clarifications. Is that true?
Our conditions, you mean?
Our conditions, I'm sorry, our conditions.
They have access to this entire record.
Okay.
So they have our minutes, they have our
I understand
video
that.
and everything. So, I mean, whether they decide that
read
they
them
want to
or
look at
not,
those
yeah.
conditions or not isn't really incumbent upon whether we give a positive or negative recommendation.
Okay.
They can put whatever conditions they like, and Ms. Williams looks like she's going to say something.
I just wanted to speak to your question specifically. If there is a tie of the commission, the recommendation goes without conditions unless the Land Use Commission wants to contemplate conditions. So as it related to the Margarita Inn recently, there was a tie vote. The commission did not recontemplate the conditions that were previously discussed on November 30th. So we did forward, as Chair Rogers mentioned, your previous conditions that were contemplated on November 30th, but the ordinance did not include the conditions that were previously recommended because of the tie vote.
It's not a positive vote?
If it's not a positive vote, I believe it is, I need to check the rules. So give me 1 second.
All right. Do you have any idea, Counselor, I'm looking at you.
I'm not sure what the current practice is, but I think regardless, City Council has access to those conditions. And as you saw this previous Monday, they do, if they move to approve, add those conditions back in. That's been the practice.
All right. That does conclude the one matter that we had on the agenda for this evening. We do have public comment now. This is an opportunity for anybody to address this board on any matter, not particularly the matter we've had before us. Is there anybody who would like to speak to the board as a whole? Yes, sir. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I won't use all the 3 minutes. Just to address Commissioner Huco's question, there was a written comment submitted by Peter Rutan, who spoke earlier today, indicating that legal counsel has been retained and a survey was conducted, and the easement was validated by Chicago Title decades ago, and then recently updated to validate that prior validation. And this is all in the letter. It's an email chain with Mr. Griffith and Mr. Rutan and I believe several city staff and Alderman Sufferton on it. So to answer your question, the answer is yes. We have an attorney's opinion. We have several other people's opinion. Real quickly, Chair Rogers, easements are not agreements between parties in 99% of the time. Usually they're disputes. Easements arise by operation of law and are recognized by courts pursuant to equitable doctrines, and they're not private agreements in 99.9% of the time. And just, I know we're past time, but I just want to say the indication of the housing going up is simply false. I just was looking at my phone. Evanston housing rates are actually below the average, even though these are the other private schools that were referenced before. Just a quick point of order. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I skipped over communication from staff. Does staff have any communication they would like to advance to us? Any questions from commissioners to staff? With that, then, I will ask if there is a motion to adjourn until May 24th, when we meet again here in City Council chambers.
I move to adjourn.
It's been moved by Commissioner Westerberg,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Lindwall. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we stand adjourned until May 24th at 7 p.m. in council chambers.